Hello everyone, I am Sleepy Shoreline and I am here to help you today. I know you use this video to sleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Where are you from and what time are you watching? Now relax and unwind. When I was 17, I started working in my local grocery store. About 3 weeks in, I got transferred from the front end, baggers, cashiers, to produce. My first week in produce, I met all the people in my department and all was going well. When I on my second week in produce, I was closing alone when this girl comes in. And my back turns to her, I hear, "Oh, you're new. When did you start?" I turn around and we start to have a conversation while I put the last few things from my cart on the shelf. Had about 10 minutes left on my shift and I was trying to go downstairs to crush my boxes. But this girl continued to talk and took no social cues that I was trying to leave. I finally got tired of listening to her talk and I started to pull my cart through the produce section, as she slowly follows, still talking. Eventually we get to the doors, employees only, and I start to make my way through, and she comes in right after me. I explain that unfortunately she can't come this way, and that she needs to just go check out, as our store was closing soon. So she says bye and leaves, and I thought that was odd, but maybe she's just a bit weird. After that I just go home and don't think about it. 2 days later I'm closing again, and the same thing happens. This time she asks for my phone number. I explain that I don't have a phone at this time, hence why I had a job so I could get one. "Okay, well, would you want to hang out when you get off?" I felt kind of bad at this point, as I thought she was just a bit odd and maybe looking for friends. I told her maybe next time, as my mom was picking me up. So every night I worked, she would come in and just pick up one grapefruit and then walk around, basically acting like she was either on the phone or pretending to shop, then casually stop by me. It got old really quick, to the point of where I would hide in the hallway and watch her till she left. Eventually, other people in my store heard about her and rumors went around that she was stalking me. The deli manager explained that she and her boyfriend, he also worked in the deli, also had been stalked by her for a number of months. Eventually, she starts coming by at night, as I was always hiding when she did come. A few weeks go by and I had just gotten off work, early shift for a change. And my friends are meeting me at work to hang out after. 2 guys and 1 girl. So I head out to the parking lot and meet up with them, and my stalker comes out of nowhere and hugs me. "I haven't seen you at work in so long." "Oh yeah, they switched my hours, so no, I don't work late anymore." Well, one thing leads to another, and my girlfriend starts to talk to her and basically invites her to hang out with us. She jumps on the opportunity, and so we all start walking back to my friend's house to hang in the backyard, as it was a nice summer night. The night wasn't bad, and we all just hung out, and I kinda avoided the stalker as much as possible, while my friend kept her entertained. The night came on pretty fast, and eventually it was 1 a.m., and my friend's mom came out and told us that we had to leave. Me and my 2 male friends and stalker head out, and we're waiting at the bus stop that my friend needed to catch when the stalker girl explains that she can't go home this late and that she needs to stay over. So I beg my other friend to stay with me, which he agrees to. We wait for the bus to pick up my other friend, then head to my house. Things get super weird at this point. Basically, this girl refused to sleep on the floor and only wanted to sleep in bed with me. I eventually gave up and said okay, while my friend slept on the floor. So I'm laying in bed and this girl stands up and just takes her bra and shirt off, and then pants and gets in bed with me. At first, I was pretty dumbfounded and didn't know what to do, so I acted like I didn't notice, as she started trying to kiss me and have me grope her. At this point, I realized this girl had issues. Don't know if they were mental or just social, but I didn't really want to find out. I gently pushed her off me and explained that I'm trying to sleep. She wouldn't take the hint though, and just kept insisting that we cuddle. I was getting fed up, so eventually I woke my friend up. Pretty sure he wasn't even asleep. "Nathan, you awake?" He sits up. "Yeah, why?" So she covers up with the blanket so he doesn't see her naked. I basically explained that I want to go for a walk. On our way out, I tell him to get his bike. So now me and Nathan are walking with our bikes and the girl beside us. I'm thinking in ways we can get rid of her. At first, I suggested that me and him just take a walk in the alley and go pee, but she says she's scared and wants to go with us. Eventually, while walking and talking, she says how she was running track in high school. "Oh, so you're on track?" "But you can't beat us at the end of the block then." At this point, Nathan looks at me and smirks as he knows we're about to ditch this girl. For it to be 3:30 a.m., this girl was excited as shit to go sprinting. She takes off running for the end of the block, and we take off in the opposite direction, back towards my house. We rush back inside and hide our bikes in my house, step up the porch, and go to the living room, making sure not to turn on any lights. We sit in the living room, talking about how crazy this chick is, when she suddenly starts banging on my door. We stayed quiet for what seemed like 2 or 3 hours for just banging on it, talking to herself and banging, then more talking to herself. Eventually, we heard the downstairs door open and we watched her leave. I lived on the second floor of an apartment building and my mom was out of town. So the next few days I go to work and I don't see her, which is good. Then about a week later, she comes in and she completely ignores me. She gets her random grapefruit and pretends to shove while me and a coworker are talking. She's wearing a backpack this time and she walks right in between me and my coworker. We were maybe 6 feet apart. She then turns to walk away and her backpack touches something on my car. She turns around and starts screaming and throws all the boxes off my car. A bunch of naked juices and some tomatoes and a few other things I don't recall. She starts saying that I grabbed her and that she wanted to talk to a manager, and so my coworker, this older guy in his 40s, tells me to go downstairs, skid away from the situation. I head downstairs and sit in the break room, and maybe 10 minutes later I'm called up to the hallway where my store manager is talking to the girl. I see from a door that she leaves and comes in the hallway to talk to me. So, this girl says you grabbed her and shoved her, and that you were swearing at her. I explain what happened to the manager, so he goes and finds my coworker, then comes back to me after talking to the coworker. My manager comes in and looks at me. You just need to sleep with her already. And then we kinda chuckle, and then he tells me don't worry about it and that she's just crazy. Eventually she left me alone, but then my girlfriend started working with me and the girl would come in to see me and her. Then they got to her line to check out. Girlfriend was a cashier and was always really rude to her. Eventually, she stopped coming around altogether, and from the looks of it, she's married to some 50-year-old man on Facebook, and she's only 24. This happened about 4 years ago, and I was 20 at the time. The first time I met with the guy who would become my grocery store stalker, he was sitting outside the store, collecting money for the Salvation Army Christmas time donations. I'm a fairly friendly person, so I like to say hi to people who work at places I frequent to be nice. This guy was around my age, very tall, with a very mild resemblance to Lurch from the Addams Family. Dark circles under dark eyes, short black hair, and kind of a vacant look in his eyes. I chatted with him for maybe 2 minutes, just idle chit-chat about the weather and whatnot. Nothing particularly memorable or interesting. And then waved goodbye and I went home. But little did I know, a single moment would be the start of something that would have me genuinely afraid. About 4 or 5 months passed by and I hadn't seen him again. But one day, as I was grocery shopping with her friends, when, as we were chatting, she suddenly gets really quiet and kind of recalled backwards, looking behind me. I turned around to see this guy, who had to be at least 6'4", towering over me, not even 8 inches from my body. He said hi and told me he remembered me from that December day. Then he asked me for my number. For me being so young and never having experienced this type of interaction before, I told him I didn't have my number memorized, but that I would write his down and text him later. I kind of half waved my phone at him, pointing out my at-the-time boyfriend, whose picture was my wallpaper, making a point to say, "Oh look, that's my boyfriend," to the guy, hoping he would get the clue, but no luck. He told me his number, which immediately upon getting, I blocked, without letting him get my phone number. He leaned in real close and said in a low voice. He told me, "Whenever I text you, is for your eyes only." At this point, I started to feel genuinely uncomfortable. I said, "Yeah, sure. Nice talking to you. We gotta get back to shopping." And I grabbed my friend and dragged her off, shooting a panicked look at her and asking why she didn't bail me out. Apparently he scared her too, with him getting so close to me, and she didn't know what to do. I want to make it clear, I'm not exactly a small girl. At 5'8" and solidly built, I can certainly handle myself, and I very rarely feel intimidated or small in the presence of anyone, male or female. But this guy made me feel very tiny and scared. In the months that would follow, he would make me feel truly frightened. I'd hoped that creepy interaction would be the last time I saw him, but that was unfortunately not the case. After that initial meeting with him saying that creepy thing about the text being for my eyes only, it seemed like I would run into him every single time that I went to the store. No matter what checkout lane I was in, he always seemed to appear near the end of it when I was finished shopping. And every time I was in the store, I would notice him out of the corner of my eye, watching me, no matter what area I was in. One time, I even caught him following me out to my car. At that point, I was too scared and I decided to say something to the managers. After letting them know what was going on, they assured me that they would tell him not to talk to me. After that, he wouldn't speak to me, but I would continue to see him follow me around the store at a distance every time that I went up there. It got so bad and I felt so frightened that I started to be afraid to go to the store at all, but I am one of those stubborn people who refuses to be intimidated by someone to the point where I'll stop doing something. I had hoped that maybe it was a coincidence that he was following me. After all, it was a pretty big store, and maybe he just had things to do that just happened to be in the areas I was shopping in. So I started to pay close attention to my surroundings. Once I started really paying attention, I've realized that literally every single time I was up there, I would constantly notice him in the areas of the store I was in. During my last encounter with him, I went up to the store to grab just 2 or 3 items I needed for dinner that night. And I first saw him standing outside the store when I got there. And with his back to me, I quickly ran inside, hoping he didn't see me. Unfortunately, a few minutes later, I saw him at the very back of the store. And with items in hand, I immediately made a beeline towards the front. As soon as I got near the checkout, I ducked behind one of the shelf displays and watched carefully at the front of the store to see if he would appear. And he did. I watched as he looked up and down the checkout, and when he didn't see me there, I saw him step outside. At this point, I quickly ran to the nearest open cashier and rang up my items and stuck my head out the door to look for him. I didn't see him there immediately, so I started trying to make my way back to where I was parked. I had parked a ways away near the side of the store where a bunch of other small stores and restaurants were lined up. And as I was walking towards my car, I realized I saw him standing by the entrance that I had first entered the store through. And so I ducked behind a pillar immediately, hoping he didn't see me. I watched carefully from behind the pillar, and as he scanned the parking lot, he obviously couldn't find me. After a minute or two, he started to walk out towards the direction of the parking lot. So I took that opportunity to make a run forward to my car, as soon as he was far enough away that I felt safe. As soon as I got into my car, I locked the doors, and to my horror, when I looked up, he was standing there about 15 feet from my car, the shopping cart in front of him. I knew he followed me, and he knew that I knew. I fully believe he had chased after me, and when I made it to my car, he grabbed the nearest car to make it look like he was collecting them from the parking lot. I remember just feeling absolutely terrified at that moment. I went home and immediately told my grandfather about what happened. I began crying and shaking, and my grandpa told me to get in the car, and that we were going to settle this. He and I drove up to the store in his car, and he walked me into the store and demanded we spoke with the managers immediately. Both of them. When the managers arrived at customer service, he asked me to tell him about what had been happening. My grandpa demanded that they ensure he left me alone or that he would involve the police. The managers swore up and down that they would take care of him. As far as I know, he wasn't fired immediately, because my friend who first encountered him with me when this whole thing began told me that she would see him from time to time when she was there by herself. That any time I were with her, she would never see him. I fully believe he knew whenever I was there. Only this time, instead of stalking me, he avoided me. Eventually, everyone who knew the situation stopped seeing him now, so I think he may have gotten fired or moved on from that store. Either way, I haven't had any issues since, but I've never in my life felt so afraid of another human being as I did that day, seeing him make eye contact with me in the parking lot as I locked my doors. It still creeps me out to think that he was watching me so closely every time I entered the store that he could so easily avoid or follow me whenever he wanted. For context, I was 16 years old at the time and also very short and skinny. Probably the least threatening person you could imagine. I just got my first ever job as a checkout girl at one of the supermarkets in my small town, which I was actually really excited about. Also, I live in England. When I finished my first year at college, I found myself agreeing to every overtime shift that I possibly could. To be precise, I ended up working either 4 p.m. to 8 p.m., 5 p.m. to 9 p.m., or sometimes 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. every weekday. Sure, I had regular customers, like the drunken tramps of the town, who were always very nice and easy to talk to, despite the smell they emitted. But there was one man who I eventually noticed was coming in every single day, at the same time, sometimes more than once. He was an Indian man, about 30 years old, and he had a receding hairline, and absolutely always wore horribly patterned shorts with socks and sandals. He always wore shorts that looked out of place. His collection of Hawaiian shirts were very ugly indeed. Nobody who's completely normal would wear that, right? No matter how long my queue of customers was, he'd make sure to join it. If there was 3 people in the queue during their big weekly shop, he would join in on the end despite always having a basket with never more than 4 items in it. I thought nothing of it the first few times. I would always just chit-chat because that's kind of part of the job. He seemed to really like to talk to me, but then again, some elderly people came in just to talk, so I dismissed that. I realized something was up when he began asking me every day what time I finished that night. I would always tell him that I finished at 11 at night, by which time the supermarket was shut, just because I usually fear the worst. My fears were confirmed a month and a half or so later when he came to my aisle as usual, but this time seeming to be annoyed. He was shouting, "I waited outside for you at 11:15 every night for the last week. I didn't see you, not once. I checked both exits. You've lied to me." Creep alert much. I hate to say this, but I was scared, so I apologized and mumbled something about being allowed to leave early all the days, which he must have waited. In general, I hated upsetting people, no matter how creepy or weird. I've learned my lesson now. On another occasion, he asked me for my number, to which I told him I didn't have one. He seemed frustrated and replied, "Come on, you must have some way I can contact you. What about a landline?" To which I ever so sneakily gave him the supermarket I worked for's number. After these incidents recurring for about 2 months, I told my supervisors who kindly would look out for him, and upon seeing him join my till, they would come and take over and let me briefly run away. I didn't want to tell anyone at first because I was new to the job and I was reluctant to cause a scene. One of the supervisors told me he handed in a bunch of flowers for me at the customer service desk on a few occasions. Another one of my supervisors informed me that he would often come in on the rare occasion that I wasn't working and look around for me, and perhaps ask someone if I was working. And when he would hear that I wasn't working, he would leave without buying anything. Sometimes I'd see him in the supermarket after that, but he would never talk to me, because I would run and hide somewhere in the store. I stopped doing so much overtime shortly after anyway, as I returned to college after the summer to study a new course. It didn't all end there though. There's only one way to walk into town from my house, which I frequent a lot. There also used to be a small shop I'd walk past on the way, which seemed to sell bags, suitcases, and phone cases, and were all generally rather tacky and ugly. I'd never been in this shop. I'd just seen the window of this place. And this is important later. I'd always walk home with headphones in, which I now understand is a big mistake. One day I was shuffling home from a day at college, on a rare hot day in England with no headphones in. I could hear someone walking behind me, but out of not wanting to look rude, I held my phone up in front of me like a mirror to see who it was. So sneaky. Anyway, it was my old friend from the checkout, staring straight at me. I don't think he knew that I knew he was behind me yet, though. Despite being 5 minutes from my house, I didn't want to run home and have him know where I lived. Instead, I thought the best idea would be to walk quickly and hide. So that's what I did. I sped up my pace, and once I got around the corner where he was a few meters behind, I quite literally darted into a bush. Peering out of it, I saw him as he turned the corner. He looked around, slightly confused, and then I heard him shout to someone I couldn't see. "Where is she? Where does she go?" To which a man with a similar accent and with broken English replied that he didn't know. I hid there until they walked past in the direction that they'd come from. Then I ran off home. I never once told my parents that any of this was happening, and I know that's naive. A week later, I was packing my suitcase for my family holiday, which was a fortnight away. when I broke the zipper to my suitcase. My dad said he'd come to the shitty bag or suitcase phone case shop with me to get a new one because it was close to our house. Upon entering, I saw my old friend once again. It was his shop. I tried to remain calm as my parents didn't know about it, and also largely because I was a wimp and somehow I convinced myself it was all a misunderstanding. I avoided further eye contact and pointed out a suitcase to my dad and told him I was going to wait outside because I was hot. I was shaking with nerves. Everything made a lot more sense now. He'd known when I was working because in order to get to work, I'd have to walk past his shop. And that was how he followed me home that time too. I reckon he followed me more than once though, because like I said, that was the one time I forgot my headphones. When me and my dad got home, I explained everything to him. To me, my dad's pretty scary. He's an ex-football thug, if you will, who changed his ways when he met my mom. He went straight back to that shop, and from what he said, he had a body good word with that guy and knocked some sense into him. Whenever I had to go to town for the next week, I'd get a lift off one of my parents or my brother. Then, when we returned from our 3-week holiday, the shop and flat above it, where he must have lived, was boarded up. I haven't seen this creepy man since, and I've gained a lot more confidence in the year and a bit since this all happened. I can't believe he was so close by the whole time. Likewise, I can't believe I was so stupid to walk around, obliviously, with headphones in the midst of all this. And also, I regret not telling anyone sooner. I can't believe I just passed it all off because I didn't want to cause a scene. The police never got involved, most likely because my stalker was highly unlikely to report that he'd been beaten up by my dad for stalking me around for 7 months. I went to university in a really small town, less than 5,000 people. The majority of the population is made up of students, but of course there are also locals. I never had any problem with the locals before, but they could be a tad strange. So anyways, about 7 months ago, I was at the grocery store around 6 p.m. buying food for dinner. I was in the dairy aisle looking for cottage cheese. We were making lasagna, when from behind me, this man asked why I was buying cottage cheese, which was kind of weird. I turn around and there is a man standing there, probably in his late 40s, early 50s, with a long greasy ponytail and dirty clothes. Something about him made me uncomfortable. However, I try to be polite and I'm a little too nice, so I engage in a conversation with him. I'm making lasagna tonight and the recipe calls for it. That's when he said, "I'm a professional chef. Let me tell you, you should not be using cottage cheese. You should be using ricotta." So I said thanks for the advice and I picked up the ricotta. I was about to walk away when he continued the conversation. He was going on about these really weird things, like how he used to have a white tiger as a pet, and how he makes homemade hot sauce out of his home. At this point, I'd probably been staying there listening to him for 20 minutes. "Do you like hot sauce?" he asked. "Yeah, sure, sometimes." "Well, then you should come to my place and make some with me. I just live up the mountain." No thank you, it's okay." The man starts getting really pushy and trying to persuade me to go to his house. Finally, this woman who was overhearing our weird conversation and could see I was getting very unnerved said it was time for him to be on his way. He then proceeds to give me his business card, which I may add was clearly homemade on regular printer paper and cut with scissors. He tells me to call him whenever I want to make hot sauce or have a drink. He went to the cash register to pay for his stuff, and I watched to make sure he left before going to pay for my things. When I walked out of the grocery store, he was standing outside waiting for me. Now, I'm really freaked out, and I have a good 15-minute walk ahead of me. He asked me how I was getting home, and I didn't want to say I was walking, so I told him I was going to catch a cab. "Oh, we'll share a cab," he said. "No. Just share a cab with me," he said. He was starting to get angry, so I flagged down a cab and I jumped in. He tries to get in the back, but I tell the cab driver that I don't know this man. I don't want him sharing a cab with me, so he tells him to get lost. As we are driving away, I can hear him yell, "You dumb bitch." I'm pretty shaken up at this point. The driver drops me off at my house, and when I get out, I see a car with the creepy man from the grocery store in it, parked 2 houses down. He not only followed me to my house, but also had a car of his own. There was no reason for him to want to take a taxi with me. Now I was super scared and I hurried inside. Thank God my two other roommates were both home. I told him everything that happened. One of my roommate's boyfriend was on his way over, so we decided to wait for him to get there before we did anything else. But he just stayed there in his car, watching our house for a good 15 minutes. When he saw my friend's boyfriend show up, he drove away and I never saw him since. I then remembered that he gave me his business card and I wanted to look him up online. First of all, the business card was for some photoshopping company, not a chef. I typed the name and business into Google and nothing came up. His name did not exist and the company didn't exist. I reported this incident to the police, but they said there was not much they could do since he technically didn't do anything. I'm not sure if this is related or not, but I have a gut feeling it was. Less than a week later, my roommates had class at 8:30 a.m. and I was still sleeping since I didn't have class until noon. I guess whoever last left got to lock the door. About an hour after they left, I woke up to the front door being closed, thinking he was just one of my roommates. I thought the door would have been locked, so whoever it was would have needed a key. I just stayed in bed. I heard someone go into my roommate's room right next to mine, and thinking it was her. Then a few moments later, I hear someone try my door. I lock it when I sleep at night, but I was so tired I didn't want to get up and open it, so I just pretended to be asleep. Well, thank God for that, because none of my roommates were actually home, and it was actually an intruder. I heard whoever it was leave through the back door, which I thought was weird, so I got up and got dressed, and when I went out, no one was there. But it turns out, whoever it was stole my roommate's laptop and a picture that we had in our living room of us 4 girls, which is extremely creepy. I reported all this to the police, but we never really heard anything back from it. I had lots of trouble sleeping and feeling safe in my own house after this incident. To this day, this experience creeps me out, and I do not want to imagine what would have happened if I opened my bedroom door to whoever was knocking. I remember when I was 5. I had a close relative, Uncle Sam. He was always nice to me, until I turned 10. After that, he began to behave weirdly whenever we were left alone. He became very touchy, and often gave me uncomfortable compliments. One day, my parents were out for a dinner party, and I was home alone. Around 8, I was sleeping on my bed when I got a call from Uncle Sam. I picked it up thinking he needed to say something urgent, but he was again being weird. He asked me what I was wearing and kept breathing heavily during the entire conversation. I asked if he was all right, to which he said, he's just sad that I don't spend enough time with him like I used to. I was so naive that I let him gaslight me and even felt guilty for not being nice to him. I apologized to him. He told me that he would like to pick me up from school tomorrow and take me out for ice cream. He gave me a goodnight kiss on the phone, and I went to sleep thinking that I'd somehow misunderstood my uncle. The next day at school, I waited at the front gate when Uncle Sam came to pick me up. My class teacher, Miss Susie, saw me standing on the sidewalk, so she asked me why I was waiting there. I told her that my uncle was taking me for ice cream. Seeing me wait alone, Miss Susie decided to keep me company until Uncle Sam came. 5 minutes later, I pointed to the blue van that my uncle drove and asked Miss Susie if she would like a lift, as her house was in the same direction. But when Uncle Sam saw me with Miss Susie, he surely didn't like it. He didn't even greet her properly when she got into his car with me. Miss Susie sensed the tension, so when her stop came, she lied to Uncle Sam saying there had been an issue she wanted to discuss with my parents, so it'd be nice if he dropped her at my house. Uncle Sam's face changed color as soon as my teacher asked to meet my parents. He told me he'd take me for ice cream some other day and dropped both of us at our home. When we went home, Miss Susie took my parents to a different room, and they had a long talk that lingered for almost half an hour, and then she left. My parents sat me down afterwards and started asking me various questions about Uncle Sam, like how he behaved around me, whose idea it was to go for ice cream after school, etc., etc. I could sense a lurking tension on my parents' faces, so I told them the truth. I told them how I misunderstood Uncle Sam at the beginning, when he was being weird. But later on, he promised that it was just his unconditional love towards me. I saw tears in my mother's eyes and rage in my father's face. He called Uncle Sam and threatened to destroy him if he ever came near me. A few weeks later, he moved to another city to live close to my grandparents. When I turned 14 years old, I went to a union party held by one of my aunts. All of my relatives were invited there as well. I was enjoying myself with my cousins when I heard my mom asking my aunt about Uncle Sam. I too realized that even though everyone was there, Uncle Sam was nowhere to be seen. What felt even more weird was that my aunt took my mom aside to talk about Uncle Sam, as if mentioning his name was like breaking the most important rule. This got me more curious about finding out what happened to Uncle Sam. Once the party was over, I was sent to sleep with my cousin's sister Ruthie, who was 2 years older than me. We were casually chatting, lying on the bed, talking about boys, when I asked Ruthie, "Hey, how's Uncle Sam?" I didn't see him at the party. Ruthie's face turned pale, like she had seen a ghost. She hesitated for a moment, then said, "Uncle Sam was arrested last month." I yelled, "What? Why?" My dad said he behaved very badly with a 12-year-old. Her parents called the cops on him, and he was sent to prison. The girl is now under therapy over some serious trauma. God, I couldn't believe it when I heard this. Who knew Uncle Sam could do something like this? Something inside me snapped, and all my innocence died that moment. I realized what Uncle Sam had in mind for me. I realized how my teacher saved me that day by warning my parents about this sick Sam. If Miss Susie didn't care to intervene, that unfortunate 12-year-old could have been me. This incident happened during one winter break back in the early 2000s. So my buddy and I had just finished working out at our local gym. We lived in a fairly small community in Canada, and there weren't that many gyms around. After finishing up our workout and leaving the gym, my buddy, who we'll call Jim for the story, suggested that we go out for a rip in his truck on some of the back roads of a nearby mountain. On the way to this extremely steep-hilled area, we were having a great time, blasting music and making jokes. However, the closer we got to our destination, the snow started to get thicker. The further we went down the back roads, the more and more trees appeared. This changed eventually, and we reached a clearing in the middle of the back roads. Eventually, there came a point where the truck couldn't go further, as the roads were blocked with heavy snowfall. At this point, our only option was to head back, but as we turned, the truck made a wrenching noise and tilted to the left, getting stuck into a snow pit. We checked Jimmy's truck to see if there was anything we could do to dig out part of the snow to help make it easier for us to exit. But unfortunately, we forgot to put a shovel in the back of his truck. I offered to run to a nearby town to get help. After running for a few minutes, I understood what I was doing could potentially be a bad idea, because the snow was extremely deep on the section of the back roads, and I only had my phone's flashlight to make out my way. In addition to that, we were in a super remote area, meaning if anything happened to me, like if I slipped and got hurt, it's extremely likely that nobody would know for a while. Hence, I decided to carefully walk back to the truck. When I met Jimmy back at the truck, the sun was gone, and a thick fog sunk into the clearing you were in, making the lack of visibility another stressful element of the experience. After what was probably about 20 minutes of darkness and fog, headlights came into view in the fog ahead of us. A man stepped out of the truck that came through the fog and walked over to our truck. The man lightly tapped his fingers against Jimmy's window, signaling for him to lower the window. Jimmy lowered the window slightly. "Are you in trouble?" he asked. We explained the situation to him exactly. The man agreed to help us. We also told him that his truck was the only one we had seen since we started driving back on the road. The man explained that he lived in a small cabin just up the road and wanted to go out and drive around with his truck on this particular night. The man then turned around and walked back to his truck and pulled out a chainsaw. He then proceeded to walk back towards our truck. Just before reaching where our truck was, he departed from the clearing in the road and walked over to a nearby tree in the wooded area on the side of the back road. He then cut a few skinny branches off the tree with a chainsaw. I got out of the truck and walked over to him while he was still doing that, and asked him what he was doing in a polite and curious tone. He said we could use the small branches to help prep our truck tires on top of the snow, and then we'd have to rev the engine a bit and reverse the truck to get unstuck from the deep snow. After we managed to get the truck onto the part of the road where the lighter snow was covering, we got out of our truck and thanked him. But he left, disappearing into a thick fog from when he came. You must be thinking, what's scary about that, right? Well, a few weeks later, I was watching the news when I saw that same man who helped us that night on the television. He was charged with the murder of 5 women who he picked up as hitchhikers from the highway. He would take those women into his uphill cabin and do unthinkable torture, using the same chainsaw he cut those branches with to prep the tires. I remember seeing rust on a chainsaw, which now I feel wasn't rust at all. The man smiled when the reporter asked him why he did it, and what he did. His eyes didn't even blink. He just kept smiling until the news channel shifted to a different news story. It scares me to think that the one who saved us brought hell to others. My name is Aisha, and I wanted to share a certain memory that still haunts me to this day. So this incident happened 7 years ago, when I was 16 years old. I come from a big family. I have 2 brothers and 5 sisters. I shared a room with one of my sisters, Ray. As sisters, especially, was only a little over a year between us. We would fight a lot, and there's one thing we both do that guarantees to piss the other off. We take turns in locking the room and taking the key for that day. So whoever has the key that day rises to the power of commanding the room. Might be weird, but it's normal among sisters. This one night, most of us were scattered around the house doing our own things, when Ray and I got into an argument over something silly. I called Ray a witch and stormed off to my room, and she replied with an F-bomb, which wasn't anything new in our lives. After our fight, I went to cool down in the kitchen. I just wanted to eat something, and made myself a sandwich, watched Walking Dead while enjoying it, and when I was finally calm, decided to head up to my room for a much-needed shut-eye. As I showed up at my door, I looked down. I figured out Ray had switched off the lights and probably went to sleep. I twisted the doorknob and it was locked. I've guessed it right. Ray vented out her anger by locking me outside of the room, and that day, she had the key as well. I kept banging on the door and asking Ray to open it. "Ray, don't be such a jerk. Just open the door." No answer. "Look, it's not funny anymore. Just open the door." And still, no answer. I was about to snap and finally yelled in frustration, "Just open the damn door, Ray. this is my room too. All of a sudden, I heard my sister shouting from downstairs. Stop screaming, dude. It's 1 in the morning. I turned back to the door, extremely confused. If Ray's downstairs, then who the hell is in my room? I twisted the doorknob once again, and this time, the door flung open. The room was dark, and the window was open. The wind coming from an open window made me thin. White curtains dangled like a flag. It was the end of November, so clearly chilly enough to not keep windows open at night. The moonlight in the window was illuminating the room. I stepped into the room and was about to switch on the light when my eyes went to the bed. Ray and I shared a bunk bed to save more space in the room. It was dark under the bed, and from that darkness, a hand waited on the floor. It was a pale, white hand, and the veins were too clear to avoid noticing. It was certain that someone had entered our room from the window and was hiding under the bed. It took me a few seconds to muster the courage, and then I finally spoke. Who's there? The hand didn't even flinch. The creepy silence remained just like before. I asked again. I can see you. Come out or I'll call the cops. That's when I heard this squeaky laughter. It was a woman's voice. Slowly, the hand started to move, and a woman, dressed in a patient's clothes, crawled out from under the bed. Half of her face had a burn scar with no hair on her head. Her eyes were bloodshot red, and she stood in the room like a creepy statue. She started tilting her from one side to the other while humming some nursery rhyme. I didn't waste any time. I made a run for my life. I sent panic to the house by screaming and hyperventilating. I was feeling a lot of things at once. My whole family surrounded me to see what was wrong, and as I told them what happened, most of them didn't believe me. But then my dad grabbed a baseball bat, and we all went back to check. The room was empty. The woman was gone. But once the light was switched back, we saw muddy footprints leading from the window to the bed. My dad looked down from the window, and he saw a silhouette of a person climbing down the pipe, then vanishing into the darkness of the street. Today, when I think of that woman, I suspect she was some runaway patient from a mental institution, or just some crazy psycho who decided to hide under our bed with some ominous intentions. My family had a cabin deep in the mountains that we enjoyed traveling to every summer. It was surrounded by dense forests that made you feel like you were escaping reality. To get to our cabin, you had to drive along a dirt road that would wind through several other properties, separated by wire fencing at a total of 5 gates. Each gate had a lock that we'd have to unlock to pass through. One particular summer, my fiancé and I traveled to our cabin with our family to enjoy a weekend. We went hiking, fishing in nearby ponds, and four-wheeling around, trying to spot any wild animal. On the day we were set to leave, my family packed up their belongings and decided to head out earlier than usual. My fiancé and I wanted to have a little bit more alone time, so we decided to leave later that evening. The day went great, and when evening came, we loaded our things into my truck, locked up the cabin, and started to drive back. By this time, the sun had set, and sort of shadowy darkness lurked around us. Because it was going to be more difficult to see, I drove slower than usual, avoiding to run off the road, or worse, hitting something I didn't expect to be on the road. The ride started about as normal as it always did. Every time we approached the gate, I would get out, unlock it, and drive through. Once the truck was past the gate, I'd go back and lock it up and move on to the next one. I asked my fiancée to stay in the truck in case any bears appeared from the bushes. So far so good, but as I made it to the fourth gate, things changed. This gate was located in a fairly large clearing, making it easier to see the landscape reflected in the moonlight. The clearing, while more visible, almost made me feel less protected, maybe even exposed to any potential threats. Despite this, I convinced myself that there was nothing to be afraid of. I got out, unlocked the gate, and drove through it. However, when I went back to lock it, I noticed a small light, about 50 yards up the fence line. I could tell that the light was coming from a flashlight, and I could make out what seemed to be the figure of a man. I stopped for a moment and just watched, but nothing happened. The light and the man remained still. Shrugging it off, I thought maybe it was one of the other property owners. I closed the gate and started to lock it up when I heard a voice crying, "Help me! Help me!" I stopped what I was doing and started walking towards the direction of the flashlight. It was still. I called out to the man, "Hey, is everything all right?" Just then, the flashlight started to move fiercely. In all directions, I could see a figure. This man, who was now racing towards me. He was sprinting like crazy, reminding me of that running scene from the movie Get Out. The person wasn't shouting or making any other noise, just running. As he got closer, I could tell he was dressed in dark clothing and carrying a backpack. Panic finally hit me. I ran back to my truck, jumped in, and sped off. My fiancée asked what was wrong, but I lied to her, saying that just something startled me. She went back to staring out the window. We drove about a quarter of a mile before arriving at the final gate. I put the truck in park and hesitated for a moment, looking back down the road from where I had seen the man. It seemed to drag on forever, but after confirming nothing was there, I got out and walked towards the gate, my heart still racing, knowing I was bathing in the white coming from the headlights, and there was nothing but darkness around me. I felt the same feeling of exposure again, but convinced myself that there was nothing to be afraid of. I unlocked the gate, and as I made my way back to the truck, I glanced down the road again. To my horror, the person with the flashlight was once again running down the dirt road, straight towards us. This time I conjured up the courage to yell out, "Do you need help?" Hoping the man would stop and respond. However, nothing changed. The man just continued sprinting towards us. At this point, alarm bells were going off in my head. I jumped back in the truck and once again sped off, leaving the gate wide open. My fiancée, who could now see the man and the light, asked if we should stop and double-check to make sure that he was okay. I told her no. She asked why we were leaving the gate open, and I had no other way than to tell her the truth about the man. I told her that he was the one who scared the crap out of me previously, doing exactly what he was doing now. Her face went white, and it was clear that she understood that this man was following us. I raced down the road, periodically glancing in the rearview mirror. Slowly, the chasing freak with the flashlight began to fade, and we were surrounded by darkness once again. We eventually reached the canyon highway, turned off the dirt road, and headed for home. When we arrived later that night, I called my dad and told him what happened. He said that he had never seen anyone out that late before, especially like that. My dad then spoke to my uncle, who was heading up the next day, and asked him to keep an eye out for anything suspicious, but he didn't see or find anything. To this day, I have no idea or what his intentions were, but I'm glad we didn't stick around to find out. I arrived at my last stop before my final destination on the following day. It was late and I was extremely exhausted from a long few days of driving, so I got my small backpack out and got inside my Airbnb for the night. It was some random house off the main road that just happened to be on my route. I didn't do too much looking into it because it was just for a night, so really all I needed was a bed to sleep in for 8 hours. Upon walking in, I immediately got a whiff of a really unpleasant smell. It wasn't a concerning smell per se, but it definitely was not enjoyable, like maybe a dead rodent under the house or mold in the ceilings. I did a very quick look around, glancing into the bedroom and bathroom, but I noticed the smell was a lot stronger in the bedroom than it was in the living room. So I decided to keep my stuff in the main living space and just set myself up for the night on the couch. I took the throw blanket off one of the sofa chairs and laid it out, but as I was doing this, a loud thump rang through the walls. I was less scared than I was confused, thinking that this was way too loud just to be the house settling in or something. But the way the sound came through the walls made it really hard to tell where in the house it came from. I stepped down the hallway and peeked my head into each of the rooms, checking for anything wrong, but everything looked okay. I wasn't really sure what to check for, to be honest, but as far as I thought, nothing was to worry about for the short amount of time I'd be staying there. I went back to the couch and continued setting it all up, then laid down and took my phone out to do some planning for the next few days. Only a few minutes after that first thump, there was another. It was almost identical to the previous, ringing through the walls and just being a single thump. I got up and walked down the hallway again, but decided to check the rooms a bit more thoroughly this time. I flipped on the lights and inspected the walls and ceiling, but still, there was nothing to show any signs of anything. At this point, I was thinking maybe a large branch was swinging in the wind and banging on the roof, but even that just seemed far-fetched. I went back to the couch and reminded myself that I was only here for one night, and whatever the problem was, wasn't my problem. I shut off the lights, laid down, and fell asleep. With the night being quiet and being as exhausted as I was, I had no problem sleeping. But the way I woke up was unusual. My eyes were still closed, as I'd only partially woken up. I probably wouldn't have even remembered it, if not for what happened next. I got a bad feeling in my gut as I opened my eyes. A man was standing right above me, staring into my eyes. My whole body tightened in that moment, but it only lasted fractions of a second before the man sprinted from the side of the couch and straight out the front door. I quickly stood up and ran to see where he went, but I lost sight of him in the trees. I closed the door, then went to grab my phone, but stopped at the end of the hall as I saw something from the corner of my eye. Hanging in the middle of the hallway was a folding ladder leading up to an attic. I wasted no more time to call for help. As you could guess, the man had been up in the attic that night, but there wasn't much up there to show he'd been around for more than a day or two. It's likely he was just using the Airbnb as a place to live, but his actions made things really disturbing. If I hadn't woken up, I don't know what would have happened. I'm a girl. My mom was a horrible addict, and she barely took care of me as a kid. At the time of this incident, I was around 7, so my awareness and understanding of things happening may not totally make much sense. This happened in the 90s. One night, my mother and I were on a car ride. I wasn't sure why we were driving, but it was late at night. I'm also not sure what time it was, but I assume it was pretty late because there weren't many cars in the street, and I was sleeping in the back seat. I don't even remember getting in the car. My mom drove up to some sketchy house and left me in the car for what felt like forever. Suddenly, the car door swung open and someone violently grabbed my arm and yanked me out of the car. I started screaming and crying until the man that grabbed me looked me in my eyes and said, "Be quiet and don't try to run or I'll kill you." He had a scruffy beard and looked like a madman. I was scared to death, so I listened. He held me tight by my arm and shut the car door, then walked with me down the street. I looked back at the house my mom was in, hoping that my mom would come out at the last second and save me. I held to the house as long as I could as the man dragged me further and further away. As he walked down the street, I wanted to cry, but I was in shock and in fear. I didn't know what to do. If I sniffled or cried, the man would tighten his grip and yell at me. I can't even explain how scared and confused I was. We walked for a little while and ended up in the projects. The projects were a bunch of buildings crammed together in a shitty neighborhood. We walked into one of the buildings and walked up a flight of stairs. My legs and feet hurt like hell, but I was too scared to stop moving or complain. We walked up another flight of stairs when I saw some random guy smoking a cigarette in the stairway. Then, without warning, the guy that kidnapped me fell to the ground. It happened so fast. I didn't even know how he fell to the ground so fast, but the next thing I remember is the cigarette guy was punching and kicking the kidnapper in his head and face. The guy was out cold. The guy with the cigarette picked up the kidnapper by the back of his jacket and threw him down the stairs. You have no idea how scary and violent it is to see an unconscious man fall down the stairs. To this day, I have a fear of falling down the stairs. Yeah, how the guy smoking his cigarette knew to help me, but I'm glad he did. Maybe he could see tears in my eyes, or maybe he just picked up on something and had a horrible vibe, but he acted instantly. The first second he could, he attacks my would-be kidnapper. And then he starts pacing back and forth, swearing at himself, gritting his teeth and clenching his fists. I thought he was mad at me, so I started to cry. He looked at me and said, Okay, shut up, shut up. He had an attitude, so I listened to him out of fear. But I wasn't as scared of the cigarette guy as much as the bearded guy, but I was also still in fear of him. He started to ask me questions with an attitude, like, why are you out this late? Where are your parents? Why would you talk to strangers? I was in so much shock and confusion that I couldn't answer the man's questions correctly. He asked if I knew my way home, and I told him I didn't. I also told him a broken story about what happened, and somehow with the information I gave him, he knew where my mom's car was. The only thing I remember about the road is passing a house with Christmas lights on it, despite Christmas already being over. I think he knew the area well enough and figured where I needed to go from that information, but I honestly don't even remember telling him about the Christmas lights. Anyways, he told me he would take me back if I promised over and over that I wouldn't tell the police that I saw him or anyone that looked like him, and also made me promise that I wouldn't tell the police anything at all. He had an attitude. I really didn't care what he asked me though. I just wanted to go back to my mom, so I agreed. I followed him down the stairs, and the bearded guy was still laying on the ground, bleeding at the bottom of the stairs. He wasn't moving at all. For all I know, he was dead, and I kind of hoped that he was. Cigarette guy stepped over the bearded guy, and I followed. We then walked outside, and my savior looked around panicky. I remember him telling me, "The police don't like me." We walked out of the projects, and my feet still hurt. He was walking fast in a panic, and I had to basically jog to keep up with him. I started crying, and he asked me what was wrong. I told him that my feet hurt, and I remember him sucking his teeth and picking me up with an attitude. He awkwardly cradled me in both arms, and then walked down the road for a moment with me. Then I remember him swaying and running behind a house or a building. A cop car was driving down the road, and he put me down and told me to run to the police car. I tried to run, but my legs could barely move, and I was too scared. The cop car kept driving and rode away without seeing me, before I could even get remotely close to it. He kept swearing to himself as he picked me up again and ran down the street. He took me behind a lot of houses and hid from every cop car that drove by. I assumed now that the police were looking for me. He even carried me in both arms, running fast down the road when I saw my mom in her car in the distance. She was surrounded by police. He then put me down and told me to run to the police. I got so excited that the pain in my legs seemed to disappear, and he put me down and ran away. I ran towards the police and my mom, and my mom picked me up and hugged me tight. The police then started to ask me and my mom questions. I don't remember too much about their questions, but I remember my mom telling the police some weird story that just didn't make any sense. She basically told me to not say anything, and I didn't say much but cried a whole bunch. Then we went home. A few days later, my dad picked me up and knew something was wrong. I told him everything, and I never lived with my mom again. When I grew up, I had time to think about that day, and I never really forgave my mother. Not too long ago, I asked my dad what he remembers about the situation, and he told me what he thinks happened from what I explained to him from years ago. He said my mom was on a drug binge. I got kidnapped. Someone saved me, but the person that saved me had warrants and wasn't really mad at me. He was just frustrated with the situation that he had to deal with. Understandably, imagine being a criminal on the run, and now you've got a kidnapped girl with you, and you just beat a guy up half to death. If he would have gotten caught with me, he could be in jail for my kidnapping. With my mom lying and me being in shock and confused, I wouldn't be able to tell them that the man helped me. Because while it was all happening, I didn't even notice he was helping me. But to the man that saved me, thank you. This happened back when I was probably about 10 years old. I remember that the school that I went to was pretty large, and I had a lot of friends there. One day though, we went on a field trip to the city to watch some dance day. It was in a large theater, and there was a dance performance on the stage. Our school was taking several classes there, and probably over 100 kids. I rode one of the buses with my class to the city, and then we were all dropped off. We went inside the theater, which had a very old and nice-looking lobby. Then we went into the auditorium, and our teachers told us where we were all supposed to sit. I sat next to my best friend Jake, and we were on the first level in the far back row and on the end. Pretty soon, the dance stuff started. We watched it for what felt like a really long time. I'm not sure exactly how long it was, maybe an hour. Soon though, Jake and I got kinda bored. In fact, I was trying to keep myself from falling asleep. I guess I just wasn't a huge fan of the ballet. Jake suggested that we could just get up and walk around for a bit. This seemed like a good idea to me because of where we were sitting. We were really close to the door and wouldn't disturb anybody by getting up. In fact, most people probably wouldn't even notice. So Jake and I got up and left the auditorium to go back into the lobby area. It was empty now, and we walked out of the lobby down a hallway. This had bathrooms and some benches and stuff. We walked through there, and then there was a staircase going up. We were curious, so we went up the stairs. They led to the second level, which was basically another lobby. That would go to the seats in the upper deck. We explored a little bit more, and there were some other cool rooms. There was a small area that had lots of pictures of performances that had taken place in the theater. There were also other hallways and rooms as well. A few people were around, but not very many. It was more interesting for us to walk around and explore than it was to watch the ballet. As we were walking around, I remember noticing this woman on the second floor. I just remember that she had shorter blonde hair and was wearing a winter hat. As we were walking around, she seemed to follow us. At first, I thought maybe she worked for the theater and we weren't supposed to be walking around over there. I knew that she didn't work for our school. Jake and I decided after a while to go back down to the first floor. When we did, the woman walked a ways behind us, and she went down to the first floor as well. But she never approached us to say anything. I remember that Jake went to use the bathroom on the first floor, and I stood around the lobby waiting. The woman was just kind of standing around in the corner and looking towards me. I didn't want to ask her what she was doing, but it seemed kind of strange. After Jake got out of the bathroom, he came over to me and sat down on a bench in the lobby. That way we could talk and didn't have to be quiet. I noticed that the woman sat down in the corner of the room and was just kind of looking around. Jake and I talked to each other for probably an hour or so, and then figured that we should get back to the performance. When we got up, the woman was still sitting there in the corner. Now, at this point, I was still assuming that she worked for the theater in some way, and she maybe thought that Jake and I were up to no good. I did think that it was weird though. We went back to our seats, and I don't think anybody even noticed that we were gone for so long. We watched the rest of the performance, which went for about 2 or 3 more hours. When we got up and left with everybody else, the lobby soon became very crowded. We each had to meet with our classes and take attendance before leaving. When we were out in the lobby, I noticed the woman looking at me from a distance. I thought that this was really weird. Soon we left the theater and boarded our bus, which was parked out front. There were maybe 5 buses in total, all parallel parked on the side of the street. After getting on the bus, we didn't leave for at least another 10 minutes. Of course, the teachers had to make sure that everybody was there and stuff over and over again. At first, right after getting to my seat on the bus, I saw the woman walking now outside. I figured that was that and I wouldn't see her again. But then when we were about to leave, I saw a car pull onto the street behind the buses. I noticed that the same woman was driving this car. Now I found this really odd. Soon after, we left. Our bus was the last one in line, and I was sitting in the second to last row. I noticed that this woman was driving behind us the entire way back to school. I thought that it was so strange. I kept looking back time and time again during the bus ride, and she was always behind us. When we finally made it back to school, she did not turn into the parking lot but kept going. I went back into school, and when the school day was over, my mom picked me up. I didn't notice the woman after that. After that day, I never saw her again. I'm still really confused by who she was and what she was doing. This happened back when I was a kid. I think I was like 8 years old. So some of the details are fuzzy, but I remember the basics of what happened. I was in school, and my 3rd grade class was taking a field trip to the zoo. It was getting towards the end of the school year, and the weather was finally warm. I remember that everybody was really excited for the field trip. We left the school and rode the bus to the zoo. After we got there, I just remember that we started looking at all the animals. The zoo was pretty large and had several different areas. We got to split up and go into different groups that would be in certain spots. Then, after a while, the groups would move on to a different location. So it wasn't like we were taking a tour and we could wander around a little bit. But we also were supposed to stay within the area, so we couldn't wander around the entire zoo. At least that's what my memory of it was. So as we were walking around and stuff, I remember being near the giraffes and looking at them for a while. Then we went into a building where they had lots of fish and reptiles. Each place we would stay in for probably like 30 minutes or so. In my mind, everything was going great and I was enjoying it. But I do remember that when I was in the reptile and fish building, I was looking at one of the fish tanks. It was really dark in that room, and the building had several different areas that were all connected. As I was looking at a big fish, I turned, and this guy was standing there who I didn't know. I'm not really sure where he came from, but I remember that he was wearing sunglasses. He asked me if I liked those fish, and I said no, and then walked away. I wasn't trying to be rude, and I also didn't think that he was being creepy at the time. I just really didn't like that fish that I was standing near, and I wanted to get away from it. The man did not follow me, and not long after, I remember that my group left that building. Then I remember that the 3rd spot that my group went to was an area with some goats and other animals. I don't remember all the different kinds that were there, but they also had a few rides in this area as well. One was a merry-go-round with horses, and there was also a train that went basically all around the zoo. Trains seemed really interesting to me, so I went on it, and it was really cool how it went through the entire park, and there was one section that even went through the woods. I went on it with a few other kids, and after the ride we all got off, but I liked it so much as well as a few other kids that within a few minutes we went back on it for another ride. I remember that I was sitting by myself in one train car kind of in the back. We left the station and were going around the zoo. When we got to the woods section, I remember specifically seeing a man appearing to hide in the woods. He was sort of behind a tree and looked out and saw me. I'm not sure if anybody else noticed him or not. It would have been hard to see unless you looked right in his direction. I also recognized the man as the guy who had talked to me, the one with sunglasses. I thought that it was strange, but soon we had passed him by. I was on the train for the rest of the ride, and soon it concluded and went back to the station. After getting off, I remembered that the teacher in charge of our group called us all together. Then she said that we were leaving, and I was really confused because we hadn't seen all of the animals yet. We were quickly put back into the buses and told we were going back to school. Then I found out that we had to leave because apparently a man had asked one of the kids to leave with him. He tried to get her to go with, but she declined. I guess she reported him, and then the man ran off when questioned, so they had to have all the kids evacuate the zoo. That's when I realized it was likely the same man who I'd seen in the woods. That must have been why he was hiding there. I remember that I told the teacher about it, and I guess the zoo security was looking for him. We left soon after, and I didn't find out if they ever located him or not. I guess he could have left through the woods. Looking back at that situation though, it really creeps me out knowing that the guy tried talking to me. I'm really glad that I walked away from him. Maybe he would have tried to kidnap me. Either way, I'm glad that he wasn't able to get anybody to go with him, and everybody in my class was all right. This happened during my sophomore year in high school. I remember that I took an elective class that was called Outdoor Activities. It was an easy and fun gym class where we went outside and did stuff. We had a different subject every week, and they all revolved around the outdoors. One week we learned how to fish, and another we played tennis. For this week in particular, we were going hiking. I remember that we hiked on a path near school grounds earlier in the week. Then, later in the week, we took a field trip to a state park that was nearby. The park was pretty large, with many different trails on it. Our teacher, Mr. Salieri, was leading the way for the rest of us. The class was not that big, and had maybe between 15 and 20 people in it. So on the day of the field trip, we all boarded a school bus and took the maybe 20-minute ride there. The class period was going to go longer than usual, and we would be able to skip the first part of our next class. That's something that I was not mad about, as my next class period was math. So after we got to the park, we all got off and I saw what the place looked like. There was a lake there and a spot for picnics and stuff. Then there was a bunch of paths and a huge wooded area. Mr. Salieri started down one of the paths into the woods. He walked pretty fast and made it clear to us that we were there to hike and not to mess around. So we started walking, and I was walking with one of my good friends, Marcus, who also happened to be in the class. Marcus and I were walking at the very end of the line. We were admittedly moving at a slower pace than everybody else. I remember that we were talking about girls and got really immersed in the conversation. There was a girl that I liked that he was friends with, and he was giving me advice and that sort of stuff. We were not really paying attention to the rest of the class very well. The path we were on was surrounded by woods and had a lot of twists and turns. Because of this, it didn't take long for us to not be able to even see the other people in front of us. We didn't really care though, and knew that we could catch back up at any time. As we continued our conversation, at some point, I remember we suddenly heard a noise to the left. It was the sound of twigs breaking and some leaves moving. Something was moving in the woods on the left side. We both automatically assumed that it was an animal at first, but it would have been a large one. I remember Marcus saying, "Did you hear that?" We guessed that it was probably a deer. We paused our conversation and started to look. We couldn't really see anything that far in the woods though. It was really dense. I sort of saw some branches and leaves moving, but couldn't tell what had caused it. We were curious, so we decided to take a couple of steps into the woods. I remember that I sort of made my own path by just stepping through the dense brush. After a few steps into the woods, I could see a little bit better. We kept walking closer and made it in over 10 feet probably. Then I saw some sudden movement up ahead in the woods. I realized that there was a man there. It was not an animal after all. But what was a guy doing right here in the middle of the woods? He was wearing a brown jacket, and I could see that he had a messy beard and longer messy hair. He seemed to turn and look at us. That's when we decided to go back to the path. Neither of us said anything, and started making our way back in the direction that we had come from. I was a little bit creeped out by seeing a guy just standing in the middle of the dense woods off the path. After we made it back, we continued to walk in the direction that our class had gone. By now, though, they were way ahead of us. We were not walking for that long, though, before we heard more movement in the woods, but closer. It seemed as though the man in the woods was now making his way to the path that we were on. We ignored it and just kept walking. We started to continue our conversation, but then noticed that the man was actually on the path now, and he also seemed to be walking behind us the same way that we were going. He was maybe 40 or 50 feet behind. I glanced back and saw him just walking after us. It was a little weird, so Marcus and I decided to walk a little bit faster. We actually wanted to catch up with the rest of the group now. After a couple of minutes of walking at a fast pace, we could still hear the man. I looked back and he was now walking fast behind us at about the same pace that we were going. And he was probably around the same distance back. We were so far behind the class that we still couldn't even hear the rest of them. But then we came up to a place where the path went 3 ways, left, right, and straight. We had no idea where everybody else went, so we chose to go to the left. After walking down that way a little, we realized that the man had gone that way as well with us. At this point, Marcus and I decided to start jogging. We both played sports and were athletic guys. We would be able to run for a while. There was no way that this guy following us from the woods was going to run too. But we were wrong. He actually started to jog after us. Now there was no question that he was chasing us for some reason. Marcus and I went faster, desperately trying to get away from this guy. The more that we ran, the more that we realized that we had gone the wrong way though. We would have almost certainly caught up to the group by now if they had gone in this direction. But we couldn't go back, or else we would run into the man that was chasing us. We just kept running, and then decided to go off the path. There was an area where the woods wasn't as thick. Marcus and I both cut off the path and then entered the woods. We continued to run, sprinting through the forest and getting hit by various tree branches. The man ran after us, also leaving the path and entering the woods again. After we ran through the woods for what felt like a long time, we saw another path. We ran to the path and then started jogging down that as well. The man was still behind us. We jogged on that path for only about a minute before leaving and going off of it and into the woods again. We really had no plan and were just winging it. After running through the woods for a while longer, by some miracle, we made it to this opening with another picnic area. There were some tables, another parking lot, and actually people around. We were so glad to see them and emerged from the woods and walked towards them. They had some strange looks on their faces to see us running out of the woods out of nowhere. But when we looked back, the man hadn't followed us out. He was still in the woods. We walked through the picnic area, and then there was another path on the other side that sort of went by. Marcus and I didn't really know where to go, so we just walked along the path. We headed down it for a while, and about a minute into this path, we heard voices of people up ahead. Then we saw Mr. Salieri and the rest of the class approaching us. They looked surprised to see us, but we were extremely happy to see them. Mr. Salieri asked us where on earth we had come from. We told him the story, and he wasn't mad at us or anything. In fact, he found it funny and was giving us a hard time about it for the rest of the class. I'm really glad that we were able to get away from the guy. I'm not sure who he was or what he wanted from us. Maybe he was mad that we disturbed him while he was walking in the woods. I really don't know. But I think it's so crazy that he was literally running after us. That was my most memorable field trip. When I was a junior in high school, I had to take an emergency trip to the bathroom. My stomach was really upset. I definitely had some sort of stomach bug going on. As I was dashing through the hallway, trying to make it to the bathroom in time, I started to hear a whistling sound that was coming from the other side of the hallway. As I got closer to the bathroom, I realized that whoever was whistling was in the bathroom. I didn't think much of it, other than that it was a slight inconvenience for me, as I was wanting the bathroom all to myself, considering I was literally going to blow the toilet up. I ran to the stall and did my business uncomfortably. The entire time, that man that I barely even saw, might I add, stayed in the bathroom. I must have been in there for like 10 minutes at this point, and there's no telling how long he would have been in there beforehand. I started to think that it was probably the school janitor, but I really wanted him to leave for obvious reasons. I wanted some privacy. The whole time he was whistling and humming while his mitts going number 2. Gross, I know, but this is what happened. After I finished up in the stall, I walked out to wash my hands real quickly, all while trying not to make eye contact with the man that was in the bathroom with me, as I was kind of embarrassed. I also had to hurry back to class because if I were to be gone for too long, it's very well possible I could have gone into some trouble. Then what happened next threw me off guard completely. The janitor then started walking over towards my direction, and he stopped after being no more than a foot away from me. He was so close that I could feel him breathing on me. I felt a tingle on the back of my neck, and I was so uncomfortable that I had no other option other than to look at him. "What the heck, man?" I said. He had this stone-cold look on his face, and then shortly after, he gave me this extremely disturbing-looking smile that I will never forget. I made my way back to class, and I was puzzled. All I could think was that guy was crazy. I texted my friend about it when I got back to class, and he told me how he had a similar situation with that guy, the same exact janitor. He told me he knew he was a creep too. So we planned on talking to the principal about him that day, but we never ended up following through with that. After school, me and that same friend I was just talking about, Elias, and another one of our close friends, Peyton, all decided to walk after school. That was something that we did a lot. Usually we would go to nearby restaurants or fast food chains or even the park. We did all kinds of stuff after school, and usually it was the most fun we would ever have. This day, we decided we were going to go to this diner that we all loved. We had to walk through this trail that started on school grounds and opened back up in a nearby neighborhood in order to get to this restaurant. Well, we didn't have to take that way, but it was definitely quicker and a way more fun route, so 90% of the days we walked after school, we would take the trails. Elias and I started talking about that creepy janitor, and Peyton started to chime in as well. He knew the janitor that we were talking about, but he never had an experience with him. We were telling Peyton just how creepy that guy was, and he started to understand. I kid you not, though, it was like us talking about him. The janitor spawned him there or something. Not literally, but it was like crazily ironic and weird. Up in the distance, we noticed that there was a man ahead. No way, Peyton said. Dude, isn't that him? The janitor from school? We all stood in fear and confusingly looked at him until we could all make out that it was him for 100% certainty. Hey, let's turn around, Peyton said. I didn't even say anything to that. I just continued moving forward, as did Elias. As we were walking past him, he then stopped and stared at us, but we kept walking. The janitor then yelled for us and asked if we would like to hang out. Okay, so not only was this man a janitor at a school and supposed to be an authority figure, but he was really a creep. He also had to have been at least 55 years old. Why the heck would he want to hang out with a bunch of kids our age for? We just ignored him and we picked up our pace a little bit. But he then started jogging towards us, and it was at this point that we started to full-on run. He then began screaming at us, and when I looked back, I saw that he had a knife in one of his hands. We all screamed for help and ran for at least 5 minutes, and shortly after that we seemed to have lost him. We later found out about who he really was the next day at school. Me, Elias, and Peyton, and our parents all went up to the school and reported the situation to the police and to the principal. It turned out that the school had no idea who this man was and that he wasn't a school janitor. He was a man pretending to be a janitor. I don't know how we got away with this, like getting inside the school and all without being detected for so long. It's quite ridiculous and scary if you ask me. They really need to double down on security because school is supposed to be a safe place for kids to learn. It turned out that the man was a convicted sex offender as well, and that he's been abusing minors for years now. He also had a court order where he had to stay a certain distance away from kids, but that didn't stop him. I personally think he was going to take it a step further this time and try to kill one of us. Some people are so messed up in the head, I can't even begin to comprehend. It was just another normal day of school. I think I was in 10th grade. I want to say it was right after 3rd hour. Anyways, it was lunchtime, so my friends and I were goofing off like we always were. We would all eat for maybe 5 minutes and spend the rest of the 20 minutes playing games and messing around and such. Well, about halfway through lunch, the PA went off and said that we were having an emergency lockdown, which was definitely kind of scary. Lockdown, lockdown. This is an emergency alert. Please follow lockdown procedures. Go into the nearest room or building, lock the door, and turn off all light. Because usually, if it were just a drill, then the principal would say that, or at least warn us before, so we knew to expect a lockdown in the near future. I vividly remember Mr. Harrison sounding a bit panicked when he announced the lockdown too. My friends kind of thought that was part of his gig, to make it seem real, but I had a bad feeling about it. Now, this is probably the dumbest thing I've ever done in my life, and I still honestly have no clue why we did this. But after they shut the school's power off, my friends thought it would be funny to sneak out of the cafeteria through a side entrance that led upstairs to one of the main hallways of our school. I decided to tag along with them just because, I'm not really sure, I just did. After walking around for a little bit, we all split up, and at this point it was only me and Andrew. Our 3 other friends ventured off by themselves somewhere. It was so dark in the hallways that we could barely even see what was in front of us. The only source of light we had was coming from the sun shining through the windows. But even then, it was a pretty cloudy day, so the outside didn't have much light to offer us. Then out of nowhere, we heard 3 gunshots right in a row, followed by screaming. Andrew and I, of course, started freaking out, so we ran outside and sprinted as fast as we could. I'm happy we were close to the main entrance of the school because I'd much rather have been outside and hiding in a bathroom or something. But now we were in the front of the school and we knew we were sitting ducks for any of the teachers or police to find us. We didn't want to get in trouble for sneaking off when we shouldn't have been, so we ran behind the school and headed straight for the woods. We had to run across the soccer field to get there, but we made it across without being seen. Then we heard police sirens getting closer. I knew they were there for whoever the hell just fired the gun, but we were still paranoid that the school or police were looking for us for running off as well. I've had friends who've gone to some trouble for truancy before, and I was definitely on edge about everything that was happening in general, as any normal person would be. This was a pretty serious situation, so we were freaking out for a while and we were trying to calm each other down. We also didn't want the police or anyone to think we had anything to do with that psycho with a gun. Well, the police weren't searching for us, and they literally had no idea we were missing in the first place, nor did anyone in the school. But we pushed our luck by continuing hiding, because eventually the police found us as they were doing a required sweep around the premises. The police ended up finding us, and when they did, they detained us until they caught the actual suspect they were looking for. Apparently, the kid who let off the gunshots was someone who went to a whole different school, and he was only a year younger than me. Nobody got hurt, thankfully, but the kid said he was coming to kill some girl specifically, but he failed. Something weird I want to add real quick is how eerily similar me and this kid look. We are both the same height, same color hair, and hairstyle, and we were dressed very similar that day. The police quickly figured out I had nothing to do with it though after we explained everything. I learned my lesson that day for sure. This took place on my very last day of high school. I was on my senior year, so after I got through today, it would be the very end of high school for me. Of course I was super excited and I felt a huge amount of relief, but there was also a sadness in the air for me that day. Because all it really meant was that I was going to have to leave all my friends behind and have to make new ones in college. I tried to not look at it so negatively, because ultimately it is what it is, and it's just a part of life, you know, changes. I don't remember exactly why or what happened, but I was in a particularly bad mood this day because of the things that were going on at home with my family. I think it was 5th hour, which was biology class. I didn't mind the class really, but the teacher was the one that made it horrible. Mr. Johnson was a jerk to me and many of the other kids in my class. I honestly don't know how he hadn't been fired sooner. He was notorious for getting into it with the kids and getting into screaming matches. One time he even broke a kid's phone, and another time he legit threatened me in front of the whole class. I don't think he works there as a teacher anymore, but I really didn't feel like going to his class that day, so I skipped it. I went over to the library, and my plan was to lay low until 6th hour. I hid in the back of the library in the computer section and pretended like I was doing my schoolwork. But really I was playing games on my phone the entire time. Not too long after this, all of a sudden the school's intercom went off. We're having a lockdown. Although I will admit it alarmed me, I figured it was just a practice drill and that our school was just testing us again. Our school does at least 2 practice drills each semester, so I played it risky and decided to hang tight. But all of a sudden, I heard screaming down the hall. It was very muffled sounding, and I couldn't make out what was being said. All I could hear was the screaming. It seemed to have gone on for a couple of minutes. I quickly started to realize that we were probably in a real lockdown. I panicked, and I thought my best bet was to hide somewhere in the library, so I hid under the computer desks. Not the best spot I know, but I figured it was better than nothing. I kept quiet and waited for the PA to come back on, and for it to say the drill is over with, but it never did. It must have been 20 minutes of me just lying there in fear. I took my phone out at one point, and I saw that I had like 20 plus messages from some of my classmates from biology, and they asked where I was, and that we were in a real lockdown. That was when my heart dropped to my stomach, and I started to feel sick. Told them all I was safe and that I was hiding in the library. There was nobody else in the library with me as far as I knew, because there weren't any teachers or kids when I first walked in, which was actually quite unusual. Nonetheless, it freaked me out even more that I was pretty much alone. I just kept waiting in hopes that it was all going to be over soon. Well, it was only just the beginning. I didn't know what I had really got myself into by skipping class. A few more minutes passed by and the screaming picked back up again, and then shortly after, I heard someone running through the hall. Then my worst fear came alive. The library door opened and somebody was walking inside. As scared as I was, I managed to peek my head up to see if I could see who it was. But all I could see was a dark shadow of someone that looked like to be around my height. I hid back under the desk, and that was when I saw a flashlight turn on. Whoever it was began searching all around. All I can remember is praying to God that I was going to be okay. Eventually, the person made their way over to the cubicle I was in by all the computers. I knew it was only a matter of seconds before he were to see me, so I jumped out from under the desk again and made myself visible. "Hey," I said. Within a second, I had a flashlight pointing at me along with a gun. "Tyler, what the hell are you doing, man?" I asked. Tyler was one of my close friends in middle school, but we didn't keep up with each other much ever since starting high school. Through the years, we kind of had a falling out and went our separate ways. Anyways, I told him to put the gun down, and after almost a full minute of silence from him, he started to break down crying and dropped to the floor. I kicked the gun away and reassured him that it was going to be okay. And I told him that we needed to do the right thing and that he needed to turn himself in if he really wanted any chances of getting better. Surprisingly, he actually listened to me, and I walked with him towards the office until we found a teacher, and the teacher then led us to the police. I, as a witness, told him everything that I knew, and Tyler also complied 100% as well. I'm just happy that Tyler found me rather than someone else. I was one of Tyler's only friends in his eyes, and if he would have found someone else, I'm sure he would have killed them truthfully. We really need to raise awareness for this kind of stuff and do everything as a society that we can to limit the violence and school shootings specifically. As much as I don't like Tyler for what he did, he was a kid who was bullied and picked on his whole life, and had a horrible home life along with different types of mental illnesses, I'm sure. So really, it's no surprise if you think about it, what he attempted to do. That's usually how it goes down. It's deafening and unbelievably horrible, as some people are capable of doing things like this. And that's to say the least. But we really need to do our best to prevent them from happening in the first place. I'm a 20-year-old female, and I'm afraid of shadows. So afraid that I never look down while walking in dimly lit surroundings. I can't even stand my own shadow. Weird, right? But I wasn't always like this. I work in a restaurant, and my shift generally runs from 6 a.m. to 4 p.m. It's a hectic job, with a not so good pay scale. Now, I get a lot of anxiety attacks because I've been suffering from depression and poor mental health for a long time. But I've somewhat managed to overcome these issues with a lot of mental strength and exercises that help me cope with life. I often set off for long drives to calm my nerves after a tough day at work. It started with a simple drive with my friend, my boyfriend, or sometimes a family member. We'd buy drinks of some sort and drive down the road beside the beach in my town. One late afternoon, I got out of work and decided to go for a drive. I called everyone I knew, but no one was available to come with me, so I went on my own. I was having a panic attack after getting screamed at by a rude customer. I bought a couple of drinks and started to drive to a less traveled route, hoping there'd be less traffic on that site. I thought halfway to the ride, my mind would mellow down. I was chugging the juice too fast, also, so after 10 minutes, I got the urge to pee. I tried to hold longer till I reached the town or found a fast food chain. And at some point, I was on the verge of losing control, so I had to pull over by a small park walk. The car parks one way, open towards the sea, and the other way led to the thin cluster of palm trees scattered over. By this point, it was dark out, and the only lights provided were those pathetic streetlights that barely do much. Half of them were flickering, and the rest of them were broken. The trees were moving with the wind, and I went behind one of them to relieve myself. I was doing my business when I heard a noise behind me. I looked back and saw a moving shadow of some sort behind the tree that was closest to me. It was bobbing down and then up, repeating this before slowly moving to the next tree and doing the same. I quickly stood up, and this realization hit me. My car was at some distance, and the shadow was getting closer each second. I was watching the shadow like a timid rabbit, unsure what to think of it. I slowly started to walk back to my car when the street light hit the shadow. The first thing I noticed was a very scrawny and somewhat skeleton-like figure. Oh my God, is that a ghost? This is the first thought that came into my mind. But no, the owner of the shadow slowly peeked behind the third tree, and it was an old man. He had 3-4 hairs on his massive wrinkly head, and his eyes, damn, those creepy, wide eyes. His body wasn't in complete control, so he kept twitching every 5 seconds. He had no shirt on, and I could only see his upper body. His bony fingers had dirt-filled nails, as if he dug the ground every day. I could feel cold sweat rushing down my spine as he watched me, and I watched him. We both weren't blinking since our eyes met. Suddenly, he smiled, and it was the worst smile anyone had ever given me. Most of his teeth have fallen out. The rest was dirty and had started to rot. The wind was so heavy that it brought the old man's foul odor to my nose. I kid you not, he smelled like a goat. A goat straight from Satan's fur. You could say that a sane person would have gotten out of there fast. But as I said above, I struggled with mental health and had been in the middle of an anxiety attack, so my brain took time to function under stress. I was not in the right mindset at all. Eventually, I broke free from the frozen state and ran to my car. When I closed the car door, I found the man still smiling at me. I could hear his low chuckle, like he was enjoying seeing me all freaked out. The fact that he didn't chase me messed up with my head even more. You want to know why? Because I figured out he was just there watching me doing my business. And I'm 200% sure that he had eyes on me the entire time I relieved myself. This scared the hell out of me, and I surely haven't gone for a drive on my own since. I thought I'd treat myself to a short getaway vacation. I live in a really flat and boring area, so I chose somewhere with a more mountainous and forest-covered scenery. I settled on Colorado, but I didn't really know any towns aside from the main ones, which were pretty expensive, so I started looking into Airbnbs in smaller towns. There weren't as many options as I was hoping within my price range, but I did find one that I thought wasn't too bad. I booked it and was on the road the following week, driving through the country to the Airbnb. 10 long hours later, I made it to the town I'd be staying in. I gotta say, I was not very comfortable when I first started driving through it. I shouldn't have expected much, but this was far less than what I'd thought it would be. The few rows of houses bordered a very empty and dark road, with old wooden power lines barely standing on the sides. Being at night, it almost looked like an abandoned ghost town. I knew during the day it would probably look less so, but this was my first and only impression to go off of. Thankfully, I was able to find the Airbnb without trouble, pulling into the gravel path that led to a cul-de-sac with my Airbnb, along with 4 other small homes. I parked and got out, lugging my bags up to the front door and getting inside. This was a very small 500 square foot home, but I have to admit, the setup was nice. I dropped my things in the bedroom and went to the kitchen to fill up my water bottle and take a minute to relax before bed. As I stood at the counter though, I heard a car coming down the gravel outside. I walked over to the window, seeing a pair of headlights appear and slowly come to the cul-de-sac, parking in front of the house next to the Airbnb. The car turned off and the headlights went out, but oddly, as I stood and watched, nobody ever exited the car. After a minute, I just left and went back to the kitchen, as it was really none of my business and I didn't want them to notice me watching. I sat down on one of the bar stools and pulled my phone out, responding to some messages and letting my family know that I made it here safe. I was there no longer than 15 minutes before calling in the night and going to the bedroom. I unpacked some things and started getting ready when I quietly heard a car door open and close outside, followed by some footsteps. It sounded like they walked up pretty close, but I assumed they had to just be walking up to the house next door. The footsteps stopped somewhat abruptly though, but after finishing getting ready, I got in bed. From what I remember, I fell asleep after half an hour and didn't hear anything else during that time. When my eyes opened, I had no idea what time it was, but I felt very unsettled. Everything was quiet, aside from the light creaking of the house. I sat up, staring through the dark room and trying to understand whatever was making me feel this way. My eyes could barely see anything until they fell on the uncovered window, and behind it, a pair of eyes were looking back at me. My heart jumped and my body froze, and after a moment, I saw the figure move away from the window, but I could only slightly hear their footsteps, and it didn't sound like they were leaving. I quickly got out of the bed and hurried to get dressed, but there was a sudden sound from outside the bedroom door. I stopped and listened as heavy footsteps left from right behind the door and ran down the hallway. At this point, I didn't know what to do, so I just stood there and listened. I heard the footsteps go from inside the house to the gravel path and down to the road. Then a car started and drove off. After some time passed, I carefully opened the door and walked down the hallway, seeing the front door wide open and hearing only the quietness of the night. I never heard the footsteps of the man by my window leaving, but from the looks of it, they were definitely gone. I did what I could, reporting it to a local police station 20 minutes away, but there was never any follow-up. Who they were, what they wanted, and why they broke in, I didn't stay to find out. Hello, this is Trisha from Mumbai, India. This incident happened right after my 18th birthday. One night, I was scrolling for Facebook, lying on my bed, when a text popped up in my messenger. It was from a total stranger. Like always, I ignored it, but then he kept on texting until I responded. He said his name was Andy. He was 24 at the time and worked as a photographer. We chatted briefly about normal stuff, and then he started telling me that he could see me. I obviously thought he was kidding, so I brushed it off. A few minutes later, he started to be really creepy. He went on to say where I was sitting, what I was wearing, Mother Freaker even described my room. It scared me because I had just moved out and was living on my own in a studio apartment. I immediately blocked him and checked my windows and doors just to be on the safe side. And as you can guess, sleep hardly came that night. Cut to next week. I again got a text from Andy. This time, he was using a different account. I was about to block him when he told me that my boyfriend was cheating on me. I was shocked because I hadn't posted anything about my relationship on social media. Also, I hadn't told anyone. I ignored his messages once again, but eventually, I found out that my boyfriend was indeed cheating on me with a girl from his neighborhood. This made me trust Andy. However, when I asked how he knew about my BF, he said, "I've got special powers," that he was a prophet of God and could sense evil people. Maybe it was my depressed mind, suffering from a terrible breakup, that made me cling to Andy, even though he was extremely weird. Slowly, Andy started brainwashing me against my friends and family. My grades suffered as I was in my second year of college. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. The negativity that he sowed in me kept eating me alive. We had a huge fight, and I blocked him for good. That night, I was sitting in my room when I felt eyes on me, like someone was watching me from a secret hiding place. I took a quick scan of my room when suddenly the power went out. I switched on the flashlight on my phone and was looking for a candle when a flash took place in my room. Like someone took a picture of me with a photography camera. I quickly turned my head to the window and saw a guy sitting on a nearby tree branch. It was dark, so all I could see was his silhouette. But then I slowly pointed my phone's flashlight towards the window. Under the dim, fainting light, I saw a middle-aged man with a huge grin just watching. He waved at me as our eyes met, and then continued clicking pictures of me. He had no fear of being seen. Instead, he enjoyed seeing the terror in my eyes. I screamed and ran to the washroom, which felt like the only safe place to hide from this creepy man's eyes. I called up my parents who lived in another city. My dad told me to call the police until they arrived at my house. But when the police came and searched the area, they found no one. My landlord also reported to the cops that someone broke into the electric shaft of the building and messed up the wires, resulting in a power cut. I started getting random texts from numbers, and I was sure that they were from Andy, or whatever his real name was. The middle-aged man said he saw me on my way home from university and fell in love with me. He even asked me to marry. My depression worsened by then, so I went to live with my parents. My dad filed an FIR against this man, but due to his fake profiles and not enough info, the police couldn't track him down. I deactivated my social media accounts and also changed my number to make sure he didn't find me ever again. I didn't see him after that, and I somehow finished college staying at my aunt's place. I almost forgot about these, but then one day, I opened my old Facebook account. 10 to 15 texts popped up in my messenger from different accounts. I quickly blocked all of them, and while doing this, I also ended up reading them as well. Most of them were about how much the man misses me and loves me. But there was this one last text that he sent that still gives me goosebumps when I think about it. It read, "Roses are red, violets are blue. If you ever feel alone, I'm always watching you." This was back in November of 2018 and takes place in North Carolina. I was 14 at the time. My family and I had just moved across the United States, and we had just gotten to the city where we planned on living after a long road trip. We were all hungry, so we decided to grab dinner before we went to pick up the keys to our new house. We went to a local pizza shop, since we had our dogs with us because we hadn't moved into our house yet. We decided to eat in the car. I'm a pretty fast eater compared to the rest of my family, so I finished way before them. After I was done, I decided to bring my puppy out to do her business, and we were standing just a little ways up from the car, playing in the leaves on the ground. I grew up in Florida, so I wasn't used to seeing piles of autumn leaves. I was just living my best life, not paying attention to my surroundings. When a man taps on my shoulder, my dog notices him and immediately tries to jump on him, as she does with anyone. So I pull her back while I'm backing away from him. He looks to be in his mid-40s or 50s. He smiles creepily at me, like it was forced. He says in a scruffy southern voice, "You have my dog, my border collie." Immediately, a red flag goes off in my mind as my dog looks very obviously like a boxer, nothing like a border collie. Now let me tell you, I'm horrible at confrontation, so I just say nervously, "I think you're mistaken, sir. This is my dog." Not even telling him how my dog does not look anything like what he was describing. I looked over to my parents' car, which was just a couple feet ahead of me, unsure what to do. They hadn't even noticed the man approach me. They were on their phones. The man now asks me, "Well, would you be able to come help me look for my dog?" I can feel my stomach drop in that moment. I still didn't want to make a scene, as I'm probably overreacting. I have read my fair share of kidnapping and sex trafficking horror stories, so I have an idea in the back of my mind of what's going down. He then says something along the lines of, "I have some money in my truck for you, if I went with him." My hands are sweating at this point, and this is something straight out of a Reddit thread. He points over to a very sketchy, run-down-looking truck, and I tell him I'm busy and I have to go, but best of luck to finding his dog. Still trying to keep him on my good side. Looking back on it now, I don't know why I didn't tell him that my parents were right there. If I would have, I think he would have backed off. I tend to overly worry about what others might think, so I was just trying to be polite and not make him mad. He then decides to grab my dog's leash and say that he had dog treats in his truck. Starts to walk away with my dog. I pull the leash away from him and I say sternly, "I have to go now." As I start walking away, he then grabs my wrist and rips the leash out of my hands, throwing it to the ground. He starts pulling me with him, mumbling something like, "Just come see what I have for you." My dog, the sweet good girl she is, follows after us and starts barking. I'm a pretty small 5'4" girl and I have no upper body strength, so I just start screaming to let go of me. My parents were alarmed hearing me scream and they immediately start sprinting after me. I start screaming, "Mom, Dad." I think he got alarmed when he heard me yell out, "Mom." The sudden realization that my parents were right there in the car the whole time. He made a run for it, and we didn't run after him. My parents were just glad that they had me. This was definitely not a good way to start off our new life in North Carolina. Not even had lived there a day yet. I really don't wish this to happen to anyone ever, as it was extremely terrifying. But my advice for you is, don't be afraid to use your words, even if they offend the person. This is not the type of time to worry about what others might think. To tell this story, I'll need to give a little bit of background to start. I live near Grand Rapids, Michigan. As in most major cities, human trafficking happens quite frequently. The reason I'm mentioning this is because I go to college in this city, and I am a 19, almost 20-year-old female with brown hair and blue eyes. So due to my young age and appearances, I know I fit the targets they look for. I had just gotten out of class for the day. As normal, I headed towards my car, placed my money on my student card so I could get out of the school parking garage, and I was on my way. Since I live a good 25 minutes away from Grand Rapids, I have to go onto the highway to get home. Instead of going home today, though, I had made plans with one of my favorite teachers to help her out in class, and thank God I did. As I was getting off of my exit, I noticed a white pickup truck behind me. At the time, though, I thought nothing of it and I continued my normal route. To get to my old teacher's place of work, I had to go past my house. When I look in my mirror again, I noticed this truck behind me still. I still just shrugged it off, rationalizing that this truck had just a similar route as me. I stopped next to a local bar and grill and I take a right turn. and the truck followed me. I was still trying to rationalize this and trying my best to shut up my paranoid mind. I summoned up to me just reading and listening to true scary stories too much. However, I'm unable to quiet my mind, and I am now picking up on just how far the truck is keeping its distance from me. As if the driver didn't want me to see who they were or make out any features, I take a left turn to get into the village where the teacher works. The truck then takes a left turn and follows me, but still keeps the same distance I had before. I'm panicking at this point. All these thoughts are racing through my mind, and my gut is screaming at me that this doesn't feel right. Still, there's this part of me that's trying to rationalize it. I take a deep breath and make a quick decision. When I get to the entryway to the elementary school, I will turn into there and go through the parking lot and back out onto the road. If they follow me into the parking lot, I'll know for sure that this truck is following me. So I turn into the parking lot, and the truck follows again. As I continue through the parking lot, I believe the person inside the vehicle realized I knew they were following me, and as their speed slowed incredibly. Still thinking I might be paranoid, I try to reason with myself that this person might be dropping off their kid or picking them up. But as I continue through the parking lot to leave, in my dash mirror, I see the truck slowly pull up to the T intersection, as if watching me go. At this point, I know they have already passed the student pickup and drop off. There's no way they could be picking up their kid or dropping them off. Somehow, I'm able to remain calm and I turn on the road again, checking behind me every few seconds to see if this truck is still following me. I turn down another road and park near a few houses, taking a couple of deep breaths, adrenaline still running through me. I stayed there for a few more moments just to make sure I lost the truck. Once I felt ready, I make my way towards a Big B, order the drinks I had planned to get myself and my teacher in the first place, and make my way back to the school parking lot. The truck is nowhere to be seen, it's gone. It isn't until I'm in the office the adrenaline finally leaves my body, and when the office lady asks me if I'm okay, I start crying and shaking. I told both my teacher and the office what happened. I hugged my teacher as if my life depended on it, and she told me to stop trying to rationalize everything. This truck followed me for far too long and was acting so suspiciously that we believe they had malicious intent. After a couple more hours to process what has happened, I can't say for sure, but I believe this person was trying to catch me at my house, or even in a secluded area, to try to kidnap me. Quite possibly, it could have had something to do with a potential human trafficker. I'm just so glad that I listened to my gut. So when I was a kid, maybe 6 or 7, this was the mid-1990s, we took a family trip to the beach in Florida. We were staying in a beach house, a short walking distance from the beach. We went to the beach and I was supposed to stay inside with my mom, but I wandered way down and before I knew it, I was lost. A lot of these houses looked the exact same and I wasn't sure which one was ours. Plus, I couldn't see my mom anywhere. Then it started to rain. I came to a path that I was pretty sure led back to our house. Only it didn't lead to a house at all, but instead to a parking lot. There was a big dirty van parked there. It was the only vehicle around. I was about to turn back when I noticed an overweight woman with brown hair, a hot pink tank top, and those big clunky thick glasses that were popular in the 80s, waving and smiling at me from the passenger seat of the van. She said something like, "Oh my, it's raining. Where's your mommy? Let us take you there. It's way too dangerous to be out here in the rain. You could even get struck by lightning." She was very friendly, almost overly so. In the driver's seat was an overweight man without a shirt on, a hairy gray chest, and some clunky-looking gold chain. He was wearing yellow-tinted Elvis shades and staring at me intently. He was also smoking a cigarette, which I knew was bad. The woman stepped out of the van and kneeled down to me, and she asked how old I was. When I told her, she gleefully remarked, "Oh my, we have 2 boys your age at our house. You should come over and spend the night. We've got movies, Nintendo, and in the morning we've got all types of cereal." I'd been taught all about stranger danger, but at this point in my life, no adult had ever given me a reason not to trust them. The lady continued talking about stuff like how the boys have go-karts and they like to drink chocolate milk. She made it seem very enticing for a 7-year-old kid, and at this point, I trusted her. I mostly liked the idea of getting to play with some kids my age. Then I remembered that I needed to ask my mom first. I told her this, but she told me that it was no problem and that they just live up the road, and that my mom wouldn't mind. It started raining harder and she opened the sliding door of the van and said something like, "Now let's get you out of this rain and go find your mom." I knew logically that I shouldn't do this, but the lady seemed really nice, and I was desperately wanting to get out of the rain. As I walked toward the open door of the van, I noticed an awful stench that almost made me gag. This set off alarm bells in my head that something wasn't right. There were cigarette butts all over the floor. I looked up at the fat man who was not only staring at me with this menacing glare, but he had this real creepy 2D smile, and his teeth were stained a dark yellow. I could pick up on a very screwed up vibe from him. I knew now that I should run, but the woman was ushering me to hurry up and get in. Her demeanor had changed. She was demanding and trying to literally push me into the van. She sounded angry and said, "Get in already," in a tone that was completely opposite of how she sounded before. I jumped to the side and I started running as fast as I could. The woman managed to grab my arm or wrist, but somehow I was able to quickly break free and run back to the beach. I think she tried to chase me, but like I said, she was very overweight. I made it back to my mom, who was freaking out. I tried explaining everything that happened to me, but I don't think that at 7 years old, I was able to convey the gravity of what just happened to me, and I didn't fully understand it myself. It was a typical Friday after my college classes were out, and I was spending the night doing DoorDash. This was my regular routine, dashing on the weekends to help me pay for all my living expenses while on campus. The night started well, getting a lot of orders done and making a good amount. And then it hit a stalemate after the big dinner rush. Very few orders were showing up, and the ones that did, they were very low paying, basically waste of time orders. But then after an hour of aimlessly driving around, an order came through that wasn't too bad. It was 8 miles away, but the payment was well worth it. It was nothing absurd, but enough to make it not a ripoff like a lot of the other ones were. I accepted the order and ran into the restaurant to grab the bag, then hopped in my car and started driving. The map said it would take 30 minutes, which I think was the longest of any orders I'd done up until this point. Most of the houses were right around campus, because any further than 15 to 20 minutes out, it becomes pretty much just bare fields of grass. As I got to that 20-minute mark, it became just that. Very few houses, mostly sitting far out in fields of crops, and nothing else. The rest of the 10-minute drive was on this empty road, going along these farms. Then I made it to the house. There was a dirt driveway connecting to the road, leading through a large field, and in the far back was a small house. Driving through the field felt very eerie. Even though I'm not one to get nervous without reason, this felt different. As I got further out from the road, the only sound was the low rumbling of my car on the dirt. I parked out front and got the bag ready, then left the car on as I stepped out. The night was quiet and the house was dark, having only the porch light on to illuminate the outside. I walked through the unkempt grass and up to the porch, knocking on the door. As I waited, I looked back at my car, sitting in the dark, with the field of pitch black behind it. A moment went by, then I knocked again, but there was no response, not even the sound of anyone inside. It didn't take long for me to realize the strangeness of the situation, seeing no lights on in the windows and noticing how decayed the house looked up close. The only thing that made me think it couldn't be abandoned was that I had an order for this address, and the porch light was on. I looked at the light, thinking, why would that be the only light? But by some odd chance, I happened to recognize the top portion of the case having a cheap solar battery. It was just an automatic light that charges during the day and turns on in the evening, meaning nobody had to be here to turn it on. Just as I was piecing this all together, though, I heard a rumbling sound behind me. I turned, seeing a car driving down the dirt path and coming up right behind my car. I stood there and stared at their headlights until a man stepped out. I yelled from the porch, asking if this was his order, but he didn't reply. He just stood right next to his car and didn't move or speak. I felt my adrenaline spike as I began realizing how horrible the situation likely was. The silence of the night only reminded me that there was nobody here to help. I was stuck in the middle of a field between an empty house and a stranger. In a split-second instinctual reaction, I dropped the bag and sprinted off the porch, running behind the house and straight into the field of grass. I looked back, seeing the man coming up behind me. Frantically, I continued running, and the further out I got, the thicker and taller the grass became, until it was covering all views of direction. By then, I knew the guy had no chance in following me. I slowed down, catching my breath as I carefully moved through the crops and tried to be quiet in case the man was still trying to find me. Eventually, I made it to someone else's yard, and from there I got to a road where I had enough signal to call for help. Police picked me up and went to check on my car, but of course, the man was gone by then. I was surprised though, because my car hadn't been looted, and the bag of food was still on the porch of the abandoned house. But that could only mean that the man had other intentions, likely far worse than just robbing me. This happened when I was 18, making the road trip from my hometown to my new college. I had all my stuff shoved into the trunk and back seat of my cheap SUV. This was not only my first long road trip alone, but was also going to be my first time being away from my family for an extended amount of time, so my nerves were reasonably high. Anyway, the directions I was taking said it was 600 miles total, which I split into 2 days of driving. I was taking whatever route the maps had me take, and it estimated I'd make it to the hotel at 11 p.m. But with possible traffic, gas stops, and getting food, I knew I'd likely get there much later. By 7, the sun was fully gone, and most of the cars were gone too. Every once in a while a car would pass by, and I'd see their headlights slowly fade out in front of me. But for most of the drive, it was just me. This actually made me really tired and bored. Around 10, I decided I'd stop at the next gas station before making the final stretch of the drive. About 10 minutes later, I exited the road and entered a gas station. Being so far out, this wasn't a town or anything. It was literally just a gas station with a few pumps and a tiny convenience store. I didn't see any other cars on the road or in the lot, and not even any lights from any nearby houses or buildings in the distance. I pulled right up to a pump and got out to start topping off my tank. And as I looked around, I almost got jump scared by a guy walking up to me. In comparison to myself, he was much older, probably 50s if I had to guess, and he honestly looked homeless. But regardless, being approached out here wasn't something I was expecting, and his short smile didn't make me feel any more comfortable. Do you need something?" I said, hoping he wouldn't walk any closer. The man stopped a few feet from my car and looked around almost cautiously before responding. "Take the exit back onto the highway." I looked at him confused, not sure if I was understanding him right. He pointed behind me at the exit I came from and repeated himself. "Take the exit back onto the highway." After a second, I said okay, and the man walked off, but I was still really confused. The exit I came from, that he wanted me to take again, was a one-way road. So by his logic, he wanted me to drive on the wrong side of the road and do a U-turn back onto the highway. It just didn't make any sense. I looked out at the entrance road, the obvious one that I was supposed to take, and there were no signs of any construction or anything blocking it. It just looked like an empty ramp back onto the highway. As I put the pump back and got in my car, I glanced over at the man who was now just sitting against the side of the convenience store. The more I thought about it though, the more crazy that man seemed, just to be sitting out here saying nonsense. I thought maybe this was some kind of trap or something. So I went with my instinct and drove out of the lot and toward the entrance to the highway. As I merged onto it though, I realized pretty much all the streetlights were out. I slowed down, thinking maybe this was a construction zone or something. I kept my eyes focused on the road directly ahead, making sure to be cautious of anything. But while I made my way through the unlit road, I saw only a brief outline of a figure to my left before a pickup truck came out of nowhere and stopped right in front of my car. Every door opened as 4 men jumped out of the truck and started running up to my car, holding weapons of all kinds. Metal bats, machetes, knives, and not even anything covering their faces. They just had this emotionless gaze, like they felt nothing of what they were doing. I quickly started backing up as they got just a few feet away from my windows. And once I got far enough back, I suddenly saw the outline of dozens of people coming out of the shadows off the side of the road. A few even tried chasing my car as I frantically reversed out of there. As soon as I could, I turned around and sped off. I called 911 once I felt I was safe, but for some reason, I never got a call back. No update on it at all, almost like they didn't even check on it. Ironically though, it was the creepy old guy at the gas station that tried to prevent me from even getting caught up in that mess. Or at least that was what I assumed he was doing. Either way, I was incredibly lucky to get out of that with my life, as I have no idea what that was or what they were all planning to do. I was delivering a truckload to a company on the far west coast, coming from the east coast. The route across the country is one I've taken many times before, being a truck driver for almost 20 years. It's always the same every time I make one of these drives. Same roads, same truck stops, and same everything. Over these 20 years though, I've never really had anything crazy happen. I've had a few odd scenarios, but they'd never amounted to anything. So when I was driving this route again, I had no worries in my mind. It was just another day on the job. About 20 hours into the route, a storm started coming over and slowing down my driving. It was late too, so by then I was already looking for the next truck stop to sleep at. As I drove though, a very sudden light appeared behind me. The road I was on was flat and straight, so I would have seen them coming in my mirror, but it was all of a sudden that they were right behind me. Maybe they had just turned on their lights or something. I didn't know, but they very quickly came right up to the back. I kept my eyes on them until they got so close that they were completely covered by the trailer. All I could see were their headlights reflecting off the back. But then their lights shut off. I maintained my speed and kept looking back at my mirrors, trying to see if they were still behind me, but I had no way to know. For someone to turn off their lights in the middle of a heavy storm was insane though, and to be tailing behind me so close was just as insane. Thankfully, a sign showed a truck stop was only 5 miles ahead, so at least I knew I was close to getting away from whatever this was. I didn't want to jump to conclusions based on just some weird behavior, But as a trucker, it's hard not to think about the possibility of it being an attempted robbery, especially when alone on the road at night. For the rest of the 5 miles, I saw no signs of them behind me. I was still on edge because I couldn't really see anything anyway, but I started feeling less worried as I was coming in on the truck stop. I pulled in, trying to check my mirrors to see if they followed, but with the rain and lack of lighting, it was really too hard to tell. The truck stop was mostly empty though, aside from a few trucks at the gas pumps. I pulled off to the side and parked in the middle of the lot. After waiting a minute and getting some of my stuff organized, I opened the truck door and leaned my head out, looking along the side of the trailer. I was drenched from the rain in just a matter of seconds, but from what I could tell, there was no car behind me. I closed the door and finally felt a bit of relief, grabbing my pillow and blanket from the passenger side. I locked the doors, turned off the truck, and tried to get some shut-eye. The rain pounding on the metal roof made it easy to fall asleep, blocking out any possible sounds coming from other trucks pulling in and out. When I woke up though, I felt I had only been asleep for a few minutes. I looked around, seeing it was still dark out and the storm was the same, if not worse. But before I could check my mirrors, a loud thump shook the truck. My eyes opened wider. I reached for the door handle and opened it, looking out at the back of the trailer. Through the rain, I could barely see the outline of a car with its headlights off and 2 men moving around in front of it. Terrified, I hesitated to step out and confront them. And as I sat there in that moment of hesitation, the door suddenly slammed against my body, shoving me back further into the driver's seat. Another man stood outside, yelling at me to stay where I was, then slamming the door again. His right hand was shoved in his hoodie, and with 2 other men behind the truck, I was in no position to try anything. I could feel the truck shake as I just sat in place with the guy outside my door watching my every move. He didn't even look away for a second. This went on for a few minutes, then they ran back to their car and drove off. I was still in shock, watching their car disappear onto the road. I called the police and put in a report, but no information ever came up on who the men were. All I know is that if I had been any less aware and had just tried to drive off at first sight of the men, I probably wouldn't have been able to make it out as safely as I did. Sometime last year, I was holed up in my house for a whole day and night. My city had a huge storm come through that put everyone on lockdown inside for almost an entire 24 hours. Houses and roads were flooding, and on the news there were even reports of wind damaging windows and ripping roof panels off of homes. I was alone at the time, spending the day on my phone, keeping up with the news and just listening to the chaos going on outside. Around 5 or 6, the power started flickering, turning off for just a few moments, then turning back on. Then, maybe just an hour after this had started, the power fully shut off. I waited for a few minutes, expecting it to come back on, but after a while, I realized it probably wasn't going to come back until after the storm was over. I sat on the couch and started scrolling through the news again on my phone for any updates, until there was a heavy knock on the front door. It scared me, being so loud in the midst of such a crazy storm, but also because I was not expecting anyone to be outside in this weather. I stayed where I was for a minute, debating whether to even see who it was, but then the thought rolled through my mind, that maybe it was just a neighbor needing help or wanting to ask if my power was out too. It was still absurd for anyone to be outside, but I went up to the door and looked out the peephole. Nobody was there. Perhaps I'd waited too long to check, but looking out, a really unnerving feeling came over me. I went back to the living room and opened the window, letting the minimal amount of light in from outside. I didn't have any way to charge my phone, and I didn't have a flashlight, so I kind of just sat there and stared out the window. Then, out of the blue, I swear, I heard a voice outside. I swung my head around behind me, looking toward where I thought I'd heard it from, but of course, I couldn't hear it anymore. I waited again, but figured it had to have just been the wind making strange noises, so I turned back around. Almost right on cue though, I heard it again. Just a quick few words, like someone was talking to someone else. I got up and went to a nearby window, looking out. It was so dark and rainy, there was nothing really for me to see. Still, I stared out into the rain, and a sudden flicker of lightning lit up the area for a second, and in that second, I made out a figure not far from my house. I had no way to know what he was doing, or really anything at all. I just saw a figure for a split second, and now that it was dark again, I couldn't see anything. Getting more unnerved, I closed up the windows and decided to go upstairs to the bedroom. Despite this, I was still nervous about the knocking and the guy I saw standing out in the middle of such a brutal storm. It was hard not to wonder what they were doing or who they were talking to. Hours went by with nothing more happening, just the sound of the storm outside as I sat in the room. Then, just when I had started to forget about it all, a sudden sound faintly echoed from downstairs. It was a door opening. I could feel my face go pale as I tried to listen, but it almost felt like the storm had grown louder, and I knew there would be no way I could hear any footsteps at all. I just had to sit there in my own thoughts and wait, horrified, in the small, barely lit bedroom. A minute passed, then another, and eventually I got the courage to call 911, though I knew it'd be a long time for them to arrive. From the time I heard the door open to the time the police showed up, it had been over 30 minutes, and yet there were no other sounds, and nobody ever came up to the room I was in. All the cops found was an open front door and wet shoe prints inside the house. There were no indications of any intent after entering my home. It almost seemed like they broke in, looked around for a minute, then just laughed. To this day, there's been no answers to the events of that night. This was almost 5 years ago from today. At the time, I was living in a small one-bedroom apartment when my parents bought a new house about an hour from the city I lived in. It was a really nice, way too big, countryside home with a ton of land. But due to their work schedules and just how complicated moving long distance was, they had to ship all of their stuff and have movers drop it off about a week before they would get there. To help out, I offered to house sit during that in-between time and make sure the move was all good. I got to the house on Saturday morning, greeting the movers and letting them haul everything inside, and they finished by sundown. All the stuff was piled in the corner of the rooms, with really just the couch set out for me to chill on. Seeing the house with everything inside, though, really put into perspective how large the place was. I mean, to me at least, it felt like a mansion. Huge, wide-open rooms with long, empty hallways. Without anything else set up, It was kind of unsettling. After eating some leftover dinner that I'd brought with, I decided to check out the backyard. It had a large patio with a fire pit built in, and had a bunch of random outdoor furniture scattered along the side of the house. I grabbed a small lawn chair and put it by the fire pit, then sat back and relaxed. The night was a little breezy, especially way out in the middle of the open fields, but it was really quiet and peaceful. It was probably around 11, and I was out there for at least an hour or so, when just out of nowhere, a man appeared in the distance. He was walking way out in the field. I looked to where he came from and saw nothing but open land. Then I looked toward where he was heading and saw the same thing. I watched this man walk all the way down until the fog covered him up. But the whole time, I had no clue what he was doing out there. Several minutes went by as I looked out into the fog, still just thinking about this man, when again, he emerged from the dark, this time walking the way he had come before. He was slightly closer this time as well, enough to where it was a little uncomforting. I ended up going back inside, not wanting to be seen. I stayed in for an hour, mostly scrolling on my phone, but also checking the windows a couple of times and not seeing anything of concern. Around 12:30, I grabbed a blanket from one of the boxes and tossed it on the couch, laying down and falling asleep in the middle of the living room. When I woke up, something immediately felt off. I was confused and uneasy, opening my eyes and trying to figure out why I'd woken up and why I felt like this. The whole house was dark and silent, and the shadows of the random stacked up boxes made it difficult to see. But only a moment after looking around, a bright glare shined into the room. I squinted from the brightness as the light moved around the room, then suddenly shifted away. Opening my eyes again, I saw another small glare moving outside the front window. Then it suddenly shifted again, coming through the window, lighting up the whole living room and directly shining into my eyes. By the time my eyes adjusted, the light was gone and the window had nothing behind it. I got up and picked up my phone as I went up to the window and tried to see who was out there, but they were long gone, having turned their light off and faded out into the foggy night. I don't know who was out there or what they wanted, but I'd say my best guess is that they had seen the movers and were trying to rob the place. Whatever it was, though, I think I got lucky, because if I hadn't woken up from the light, it's likely I would have had to find out their intentions the hard way. It was just a regular Friday night after getting out of a long closing shift at work. I made a quick microwave meal, then hopped online with some of my buddies and started gaming. I had an energy drink and some snacks and was ready to stay up late and enjoy the night. We gamed for a while. I never even checked the time, but at some point there was a knock. At first I just told my friends to hold on as I took my headset off and stood up. But when I turned around from my desk, I realized how dark it was inside and outside, seeing only the light from my computer. I stood there, understanding now how completely out of the norm it was for someone to be at my door this late into the night. And that's when I saw a man looking at me through the window. I froze when I saw him, feeling my stomach drop out of the eeriness of him staring at me. Then the man yelled through the glass, asking me a question, but I was too out of it to understand him. "What?" I said, walking closer to the window. The man repeated himself, asking me if I was someone he knew, named Jake or Jack or something. I didn't catch the name, but it definitely wasn't me. I shook my head no, and the man said nothing, as he walked away from the window and disappeared past my front yard. Being a bit shaken, I immediately shut the blinds, then went back to the computer and told my friends about what just happened. They all didn't even believe me at first, but I think they heard the shakiness in my voice as they started asking a lot of questions, which only made me even more creeped out. I took their advice, going around and making sure all the doors were locked, then also locking the windows, which I'd never even bothered to do before. Then they assured me everything was okay, and we got back to what we were doing. A couple hours passed, and honestly, I'd completely forgotten about what had happened. I think I assumed that if they were to do something, it would have been right after he'd shown up. But then a loud knock from behind me almost shook me off my chair. This time, it was definitely from the front door. I told my friends, whispering into the headset. They said to see who it was and just call the cops. Doing as they said, I quietly walked over to the door and looked out onto the porch. It was him again, standing there and waiting for me to answer. I watched for a minute, and oddly, he kept looking to his right, as if he were looking at something or someone. I backed away and got my phone, calling the cops and whispering to them what was going on. Another knock came as I made my way back to the door and looked out, seeing the man looking off to the side again. Then he made a small gesture with his hand before knocking one more time. But the night was quiet enough for me to hear someone else's footsteps moving around to the side of the house. I followed the sound with my eyes until it stopped right under one of the windows. I saw the glass shift up slightly before getting stuck on the lock and falling back down. They tried again, but the window didn't give in. After this, there was probably a whole minute that went by where I didn't hear anything. I just stood there and listened to the operator updating me on the arrival of the officer as I stared at the window. A loud, dull sound came from outside the window, like something being wedged into the wood. I could see the entire frame around the glass moving as I backed away and tried to think of what to do. But suddenly, a set of footsteps ran from the front door to the side window, followed by both of them running away. Only a moment later, I saw the flashing red and blue lights coming through the windows. As for what happened afterwards, there wasn't much. Police had nothing to really go off of. I gave them a detailed description of one of the men, but that just wasn't enough. However, it's been over a year since that night, and there's been no signs of them having ever come back. There are Dunkin' Donut shops everywhere here out east. They seem to be at just about every street corner. Personally, I've always liked their coffee, and I go there all the time. But something happened the last time I went there. It was the morning, and I was on my way to work. I don't get coffee every day on the way to work, but just here and there. When I do, most of the time, I go to this one Dunkin' Donut store that's on the way. I remember that I pulled into the parking lot and parked. Then I went inside. It was decently busy with a lot of other people in there. I got in line and then ordered within probably a minute or two. After getting my coffee, I left the store and walked back out into the parking lot. Now, I had been inside the Dunkin' for less than 5 minutes. And when I got back towards my car in the parking lot, I saw that there was a man standing around next to it. This was weird because I wasn't even parked like right next to the building, but sort of far away. I walked closer to my car, wondering who this guy was and what he was doing. I didn't get a great look at him because he wasn't exactly facing me. He appeared to be about average height though, and was wearing a black jacket. He was also standing on the passenger side of my car. When I got closer, it looked like he might have been on the phone. but there were no cars parked directly next to mine on either side. So this was weird. Finally, I made it to my car and I hit the unlock button. My plan was to just ignore the guy and then drive away. I got inside my car, sat down and started the engine. But as soon as I did, the passenger side door opened up. I saw the man get in and sit down right next to me in my own car. I was shocked at what was happening. After the guy sat down, I looked over at him and asked him what he was doing. He was not looking at me, but instead looking out of the window. He said nothing. Then, after a few seconds, I said to him, "I think you're in the wrong car." He still said nothing. After a couple more seconds, I told him to get out of my car. The guy was still ignoring me, and I couldn't believe it. I said to the guy that if he didn't leave, I was going to call the cops. At first, he still didn't do anything. But several seconds after that, he suddenly turned. It was very fast, and when he did, he reached for my keys, which were in the ignition. I was a little bit slow to react, but I tried to stop him. I grabbed his arm, but then he grabbed my arm with his other hand. We briefly struggled, but then he was able to pull the keys away from me. Following this, the man actually took a swing at me with the keys, using them as a weapon. With nothing to defend myself, I reached for the driver's door and I got out. Then I ran away from the car and I got my phone to call the police. I made it back inside of the Dunkin' store and then let police know what was going on. As this was happening, I saw my car leaving the parking lot with the man behind the wheel. He'd stolen my car. The police got there about 10 minutes later and I filled out a report. I also had to call my work and let them know of the situation. Luckily, they understood and allowed me to take the day off. This could have been a huge headache for me, but the man who stole my car was caught later that same day. Apparently, he was driving recklessly, speeding and swerving between lanes. The police briefly chased him, and he eventually pulled over only to ditch the car and flee into the woods on foot. I was so happy that my car didn't have any damage. I got it back, but I've not gone back to that Dunkin' since. This story happened several years ago. During this time, I worked at a Dunkin' Donuts. I was part-time and got all kinds of different hours. We closed at 9 p.m. Now, on this particular night, I was working until close. This is something that I did all the time, and I didn't mind. Usually, the shop would be really quiet at night. Far more people seemed to get donuts and coffee in the morning. Still, sometimes it would surprise me and we would be busy. That wasn't the case for this night in particular. I was working by myself, but that wasn't supposed to be the case. My coworker didn't show up and didn't call in either, but I was fine with working alone and knew that I could handle it. I figured that things wouldn't be too busy at all. When I started, some customers came in here and there and ordered stuff. The inside of our shop was a little bit larger than most Dunkin's. There was a couple of booths and some other tables around. Sometimes people would come in and work on their laptops or whatever. This night, I didn't notice that and the place seemed empty. For the last hour and a half, we didn't get a single customer. Then, finally, at 9 o'clock, we closed. I walked around the lobby just to make sure that everything was in order. But when I did, I passed by a booth and saw that a guy was on the floor. He was crouched down and it was like he was hiding. He was in a location that would be impossible to see from behind the counter. I saw him looking at me as I spotted him, and it was really awkward. I asked him if he was all right. Clearly he was. The man didn't move for a second. Then he got out from his cramped hiding place. He stood up and then said that he was fine. The man was average height, thin, and had kind of messy hair. I told him that we were closed now and he would have to go. He said okay, and then took a couple of steps towards the door. But then he suddenly turned and began sprinting. It all happened so fast, but he wasn't sprinting for the door, and instead went for the counter. He then went behind the counter and appeared to go after our cash register. When I realized what he was doing, I headed for the exit to leave. I wanted to just get out of there and call the cops. As I was walking towards the door, the man suddenly shouted at me to stop. He said that I couldn't leave and told me to stay and go over to him. By now, I was standing in the lobby, probably about 30 feet from the door and 40 feet from the man. I didn't move. I wasn't sure if this guy had some kind of weapon on him or something, but I also certainly didn't want to go over to him. I just ran for it, going towards the exit. As I did, I heard him screaming at me to stop. Then, he started to run after me, but I kept going, and I made it to the exit, opened up the door, and ran out of there. I didn't think that the guy would leave after me. I figured he was trying to rob us, and with me gone, he'd stay in there, get his loot, and then flee. But that wasn't the case. He kept running after me, even leaving the building. Now we were both outside, and I was running through the parking lot. There were several other businesses very close by, but most of them appeared to be closed at this hour. I just wanted to go to the nearest open place, go inside, and tell everybody to call the police. If I was by other people, it would make me feel safer. So after running out of the Dunkin' parking lot, I was in a Jimmy John's parking lot, but they were closed. I kept running with the man chasing after me a ways back. I spotted a gas station up ahead that looked to be open. I was running as fast as I could. Soon I made it there and went inside. Then I yelled for everybody that could hear me to call the police. I only saw an employee behind the counter and one customer inside. Then I ran to the back of the gas station and went into the bathroom. When I made it in there, I locked the door and called the cops. Then I waited for them to arrive. I didn't hear the man inside the gas station or anything. When the police got there, he was gone. We went back to the Dunkin', and I finished talking to the police, as well as giving them the surveillance video. They said that they would look for the suspect, and I locked up the store and left. After that, I never heard anything more about it. I also only worked at Dunkin' for about another month. Luckily, I never saw or heard from that guy again. I used to work overnights at a 24-hour Dunkin'. Not sure whose idea it was for us to be open 24 hours, but nobody ever came in late at night. At least not to the location that I worked at. It was actually kind of nice though, because I never really had to do that much work. By the time I left, the morning employees would be there. They would take care of the busy time in the morning. That's when everybody would be getting coffee and stuff before work. But I didn't have to worry about that. I would just help the few people that got coffee in the late night and overnight hours. One night I was working, and obviously by myself. I think that it was about 2 o'clock in the morning at this time. We hadn't had any customers in a while. I was just chilling behind the counter, sort of in the back. I remember hearing the door open, so I moved closer to the counter to see who was there. I expected a customer to come up and order something, but instead, the first thing I saw was a man walking through the lobby and sit down at a table. The guy never faced me. I was looking in the opposite direction the whole time, so I didn't really see his face at all. He was also wearing a sweatshirt with a hood and was looking down. He then sat down at a table, facing completely away from me. I found this behavior to be slightly suspicious, but still, I wasn't going to freak out or anything. I stood there for about a minute in case he got up to order something, but he stayed there. I couldn't tell if he was on his phone or something. That's what I assumed he was doing, because he was just looking down at the table, it appeared. When it became apparent that he probably wasn't going to get up and order something, I moved away. I went a little bit more into the back where I could chill and go on my phone or whatever. I couldn't really see much about in the lobby from there, but I could see part of it. For example, I could basically just see the register and where people would order, as well as part of the donut case. I was back there for probably like 10 minutes. I didn't see or hear anything, so I assumed that the man was still just sitting there. I got up to walk back over to the counter. As soon as I got back out, I saw the man standing there. He was to the right of where you order, but right in front of the counter. He was facing me, except I saw that he had very long hair, and it was coming down in front of his face. It was a very creepy sight. I could barely see any part of his actual face because of it. Was he trying to scare me or something? I walked over to him and asked if I could help. Instead of ordering something or even answering me, the man then jumped over the counter. I quickly moved to the side and away from him. Now that he was on the employee's only side of the counter, he started running over to me. When he got close, he reached out to grab me. I moved away just on time though, and I ran for the door and left the building. The man did not chase me outside and remained in there. So I went for my car, which was the only vehicle in the parking lot. I got inside, locked the doors, and then called the police. Then I waited in my car for them to arrive. If the man came out and chased after me at any point, I would be able to drive away. Luckily, he didn't. The police got there a short time later and then entered the building. They found the man crouched down behind the counter. When he was located, the guy tried fighting off the officers before he was eventually arrested. I think that he was under the influence of drugs, and that was to blame for his crazy behavior. After this experience, I wanted to get off the night shift as soon as possible. It took 2 weeks, but I was soon able to. Not long after that, I quit Dunkin' and moved on. That was by far the scariest thing that happened while I worked there. I used to go to Dunkin' almost every morning on my way to work. It was a routine for me to stop, go inside, pick up my coffee, and then go to work. I'm honestly lazy in the morning, and I don't feel like making my own coffee. Plus, it doesn't taste that good when I'm thinking. I know I could save lots of money or whatever, but I just don't care. There are Dunkins all over the place near where I live. I'd probably pass by 3 or 4 alone on my drive to work every day. But there was one in particular that I would usually go to. It was just the most convenient. With all of the factors such as parking lot and in and out from the highway, I liked it the best. So I got there one day and went inside to order. Usually it was pretty busy at this time in the morning. So after I ordered, I was standing there near a couple of other people waiting for the coffee. In that time, this guy that was next to me started talking to me. He said that he saw me there all the time, and I said yes, I go there a lot. I didn't recognize him, but I never pay close attention to the other customers. I'm always tired and haven't had my coffee yet. So the guy started talking to me, asking me where I'm from and where I work and stuff like that. I was talking to him, but he seemed a little bit strange. Then he asked me for my number. I didn't want to give it to him, and I declined. At about that same time, my coffee was done. I picked it up and then left. Now, fast forward to the next day. I went to Dunkin' again to get coffee like usual. I ordered and was waiting in the same spot, and the same guy came up and approached me. I was disappointed to see him there again. He said it was a crazy coincidence to see me here. He then tried asking me to hang out with him and convincing me to give him my number, but I kept saying no. He was being really insistent about it. The situation was frustrating. I did not want to give him my number. But my coffee was done, I picked it up. The guy sort of walked next to me, and as I went to leave, I turned and told him that I was not going to this Dunkin' ever again. Then I walked out. But when I left the building, the man did as well. I turned and told him not to follow me. The guy said that he wasn't. I walked out to my car, and luckily did not see the man following me. But as soon as I pulled back onto the road to drive away, I saw a car pull out behind me. I looked in my mirror and saw that the same man was driving. I hoped this didn't mean he was going to follow me, but unfortunately he did. After leaving Dunkin' and driving down one road, I then merged onto the highway, and he was still there. I drove the entire rest of the way to my job. It took about 15 minutes, and he was still following me when I pulled into the property. I was worried, but I always parked in a secure area where I had to show my ID to get into it. So I was able to get through, and obviously the guy wasn't able to. He stayed in the parking lot area that wasn't restricted. I figured he would leave after that, and I felt better. I went through the normal workday and then left at about 5 o'clock. When I did, after leaving the parking lot and going back onto the road, a car pulled out behind me. Soon, I realized that it was the same guy. I don't know if he waited there all day for me, or if he came back knowing that I would be done with work. Either way, he was following me again. I started driving home, but he followed wherever I went. Every turn that I made, he did. Soon, I was getting close to where I lived. Instead of driving home, I went back onto the highway. I wasn't really sure where I was going, but I certainly wasn't leading this guy to my house. I drove along the highway and then took an exit and drove around some more. I started just driving around that area of town for a while. Traffic was sort of bad at this hour. I was able to go in a sort of busy street and actually get a car or two between us. Then I changed lanes a couple of times and went through a yellow light. The car behind me stopped, which trapped the guy at the light. Really, I just got lucky. I realized that I had made it away from him, and then I headed for home. I was able to make it back safely. After that happened, I obviously did not go back to that Dunkin'. I work at Dunkin', and this is something that happened several months ago. I've had the job for almost a year. The location that I work at doesn't seem to be that busy most of the time. I guess it's not in the most populated area, but we do get a good amount of people during the morning rush. That's when a lot of people stop by for coffee and donuts. But other than that, we're pretty quiet for much of the day. On the day of this story, I was working a shift that started in the morning and ended in the late afternoon. So when I got there, I think about 10 a.m., we were somewhat busy. The busiest time of the day had passed, but I was working with two other coworkers. Shortly after I got there, one of them left, and by 2 p.m. I would be all by myself. Now, I would say at around 1 p.m., I was standing behind the counter, and no customers were inside. Then a man walked in. He was a larger guy with blondish-colored hair and a bit of a beard, which was the same color. After entering, he walked up to the counter right in front of me. I said hi, and the man said that he would have an everything bagel with cream cheese. Unfortunately, we had run out of everything bagels that day. We likely wouldn't have any more until the next morning. After I told the man we didn't have any everything bagels, I thought maybe he would order something else. Instead, he just said okay and walked out. Now, about an hour went by. We got a couple customers in that time, but not many. Then the same man walked in. When I realized it was him again, I found it a little bit interesting. He walked up to the counter once more and ordered the same thing as before. I told him we still didn't have any of that kind of bagel. Without saying a word or even showing any kind of emotion, he just laughed again. Now I found this to be strange. I didn't really know what this guy's situation was, but it only gets weirder. About 30 minutes after that, the man came back. The same as the first two times, he walked in and approached me at the counter. He asked for an everything bagel again. I told him we still didn't have any and wouldn't for the rest of the day. Then I asked him why he kept coming in here and ordering it. The man denied ever being in here before. He said this was his first time. I thought that he was joking, even though he wasn't smiling and actually seemed serious. I told him that he was here 2 times before and ordered the same thing, but he claimed that he wasn't here. I was telling him how he had come before and stuff, but as I was talking, he just walked out and left the place again, completely ignoring me. I thought that it was really strange. By that time, I was just working by myself. We really weren't that busy anymore at all. So I kept working, and things were slow as expected. For the next probably hour or so, we had only maybe 3 or 4 people come in. Then the man returned. This time though, I spotted him at a window. Like many Dunkins, we have some large windows so you can see a lot of outside. I just remember noticing the man standing outside the window and just looking in. He put his hands up against the glass and moved his face really close. He was just staring in with wide eyes. It was really creepy, to be honest. He just kept staring in, and after a while, I waved at him. Nothing happened though, and he didn't move. This went on for the longest time. I thought about going outside, but decided not to. As time went on, the expression on his face seemed to get angrier and angrier. Eventually, after about 10 minutes, he finally walked away. I tried to see where he was going, if he drove here or what, but he just walked around the building out of my sight. It seemed as though he went into another property nearby after that. I was so weirded out by the whole thing. I still don't know what happened. Since that day, I haven't seen the man. It was a Friday night, back in 2018. I was working at home on a paper I needed to finish for work, and was trying to get it done so I could enjoy my weekend without having to worry about it. It was probably somewhere around 10 at this point, but I'd been working in my office for a good 3 hours. This was after a full day already too, so I was getting pretty exhausted. I kept finding myself getting distracted or losing focus, so I paused what I was doing and stood up to stretch my legs and try to wake myself up. I paced around the room a bit, But as I passed by the wall opposite of my desk, I noticed something move in the window. I stopped and did a double take, looking out the window again. I was on the second story of my house, but the window has a view of the front portion of the property by the garage and porch. At first, I didn't see anything and thought my mind was playing tricks on me, but then I saw a bit of movement again. It was a shadow hovering over the sidewalk leading up to the porch. Someone was standing outside the front door, or at least that's what it looked like from the shadow. After looking out the window for a couple minutes and seeing the shadow barely move, I left my office and went downstairs. I leaned on the front door and looked out the peephole. There was a man looking about 40 years old and bald with a scruffy gray beard. I watched for a moment. He never knocked or rang the doorbell or made any noise at all. He just stood there. What started freaking me out more was that I didn't know how long he'd been there for, since I was working and never noticed him until just a couple minutes ago. Wanting some answers to why the man was here, I opened the door. Immediately, I was taken aback because the man didn't even flinch. His face stayed the same, being cold and lacking emotion. "What are you doing here?" I said in a stern tone. The man continued to look at me, but didn't answer. Then his eyes moved past me and looked down the hallway of my home. I moved the door further in toward my body to hide the view. "I don't know why you're here, but you need to leave," I said, closing the door firmly. His strange behavior was both creepy and aggravating. Him ignoring me and just standing there made me really frustrated. But then I heard his footsteps begin walking off the porch and away from the house. I sighed in relief and checked to be sure he'd gone away, then went back up to my office. Trying to forget about the man and focus back on my work, I continued where I left off. About 5 minutes later, and just as I was beginning to really start working, a sudden knock echoed through the house. It was from the front door, but the knocks were loud, like someone banging on the door with their whole fist. Irritated, I got up and quickly ran down to the front door, swinging it open aggressively, with the intent to yell at the man. But when I saw him, I quickly changed my mind. Something about the look in his eyes and the way he was standing instantly shifted my anger into fear. I looked down at his hands, seeing him holding something to his side, like he was trying to conceal it from me. All I could make out was the top of a small handle, resembling that of a knife. I looked back up at him, only to see his whole body jolt toward me. I jumped back and slammed the door shut, then fought to lock it as the man was trying to turn the handle from the other side. Once I got the handle and the bolt lock latched, the man started banging on the door again for several seconds before running away. I stood there with barely any breath in me, feeling my adrenaline still surging through my body. Shakily, I went to the office and called 911. The man was never seen after that, and no real answers to what happened that night were ever found. Last winter, I went on a trip to see a few of my friends from college. The drive was 18 hours, so I did it in 2 9-ish hour sections, staying at an Airbnb on the way there. It was the same thing on the way back, but I'd booked a different Airbnb just for fun, I guess. I thought it would be nice to see some different areas and whatnot. Anyway, a bit of heavy snow caused some delays, and I didn't get to the town until 9 p.m. It was a very small area, which I was already aware of because there were pretty much no big towns or cities at the halfway point of the 18-hour drive. The last Airbnb was in a small town as well, but this one was noticeably much smaller. A few stores bordered the road, but all the houses were either on farms or just really far apart. When I got to my Airbnb, it was no different, being pretty far from other houses. However, the outside was somewhat modernized. It clearly had some cabin-style features, but it almost looked out of place compared to all the other houses I could see. I parked on the gravel driveway and went up to the door, putting in the code and going inside the house. I'd seen the pictures of the inside online, and it looked about the same. I went around and checked out all the rooms, then put my things in the bedroom and went out to the couch. As soon as I sat down and picked up the remote, I heard a tapping noise from right behind me. I quickly turned my head, seeing a woman outside the window, tapping on the glass. Her hair was unkempt and long, and she had a crazy sort of look in her eyes. Once she got my attention though, she pointed toward the front door and walked away from the window. I got up, still with my heart racing from the unexpectedness of it, and made my way to the door. Knowing it was just some old lady, I didn't exactly feel scared, but I was definitely not feeling safe either. I cracked the door just enough to talk to her. She smiled and said she needed help. I waited for a second for her to explain, but after a moment, I asked what she needed help with. She looked behind her, saying she lost something in the road just outside the house. I looked out, not being able to see anything past the lowly lights of the Airbnb. "I'm not really sure I can help with that," I said. Her smile left her face, and then she repeated herself, like the whole thing about her losing something on the road, repeating it almost word for word. "Yeah, I know. I don't think I can help. Sorry," I said again, closing the door. I waited for a minute until I could hear her leave. Then I went back to the couch. I wasn't sure if she was just some crazy lady or if there was something else going on, but it was just a very strange way to be introduced to the town. I relaxed and turned on the TV, watching some shows until 11 when I got in bed. I think I still felt a bit uncomfortable because I found it difficult to fall asleep. All I remember is laying in bed restless for a whole hour, then abruptly waking up sometime in the middle of the night. There was a sound coming from the front of the house. It was quiet, but with the rest of the house being silent, it stood out. My mind immediately went to the lady from earlier as I got up from the bed and nervously walked down the hallway and looked at where I was hearing it from. The front door. I rushed over to stop them, but the door opened just as I got my body against it. I pressed all my weight into the door as whoever was on the other side seemed to do the same. I'm a pretty big guy, so whoever it was out there had to be big too, because for a moment it felt like they might actually overpower me and get the door open, but they gave up after a few seconds of pushing and sprinted down the driveway. I locked the door and ran to the window, trying to get a view of who they were, but they were already past the light. I thought through my options for a second, then ran to grab my things from the bedroom and went out to my car, driving away. I didn't want to be at that house any longer, and I knew police in a small town like that wouldn't be all that helpful. I don't know who was behind that door, but I'm sure they had to have been with the woman from earlier that night. If I'd went out to help her, or if I'd woken up even a second later, I don't think I would have been seen again after that night. I was out camping in Colorado a few years ago during fall. This camping trip was an impulse decision, as I just felt like going out for the night and spending it in the calming nature. I had walked down a 2-hour trail that led to the spot I set up at. It wasn't a big campground like all the other places were. This was a small opening at the end of a dirt path that I'd found a couple years back. and nobody else ever seemed to come here. The forest around the opening was really nice too, and over the years I've gotten used to navigating it without getting lost. On this day, just an hour or so before sunset, I set out on a short walk around the area. Going for walks around this time is always the best, being that the woods are calm and the breeze starts to set in. I walked out and around for maybe 20 minutes before I saw something ahead. A man walking in the woods just like me. He was crossing in front of me about 60 yards out, so pretty far, and he didn't look like he noticed I was there. But what was odd was the way he was walking. He was motioning his hands around and nodding his head, and although I couldn't hear him, I could see his mouth moving like he was talking. I waited to see if maybe someone was following behind him, but no, it was just him talking to himself. Maybe it wasn't something to get overly creeped out on, but I'd never seen anyone out here before, and the man didn't exactly look normal. After a minute though, he was gone. I turned around and went back to my tent, not really feeling comfortable being out in the woods with that guy wandering around. I waited a half hour, then got a campfire going as the sun was now set. I had a folded chair I was sitting on, and I mostly just thought to myself for the next hour. Not about anything particular, but more in a way to clear my mind. Then, about 2 hours past sunset, I heard something in the distance. I moved away from the crackling fire and toward the trees so I could hear better. It was someone talking or mumbling far out in the woods. Even stranger though, I didn't see a flashlight or any source of light. He was walking out there in the pitch black. My stomach dropped, knowing it was extremely unlikely that the man from earlier could have just stumbled upon my campsite by accident. I stayed and listened, hoping that by some chance he didn't know I was here, it was just passing by. 30 seconds later, the voice faded out. I wasn't fully convinced this was all just chance though. I covered most of the fire, leaving only a small flame burning so it wouldn't create too much light. Then I waited and listened. The next hour was unnerving to say the least. I didn't hear or see anything, but it was the anticipation that kept me feeling uneasy. And then, at what had to be 11 p.m. by now, footsteps came rushing from directly in front of my campfire. I shot up from my chair and unholstered my pistol as a man I recognized as the one from earlier ran up to the other side of the fire and stopped just 10 feet from me. He wasn't talking anymore, but instead had a grin. Not an over-the-top smile, but just a slight friendly grin. As I aimed at him, he said nothing and did nothing. He just looked at me. Walk away, right now, I said under my breath, trying to be as intimidating as possible. He looked me in the eyes, then down at my gun, and then back at me. His grin went away, and there was a moment where it felt like he was just about to do something. But then he smiled again and walked off into the woods. I didn't waste any time packing things up with one hand as I kept my pistol out, then left in the opposite direction from where he went. The whole way back, I was so paranoid that I kept thinking I was hearing the man's voice talking to himself again. What he was doing out there and what he was trying to do to me is anyone's best guess. Had I not been prepared though, I don't think I would have been able to leave those woods. Not more than a week or two ago, I hiked out on a long trail in dense woods behind my town. I lived in a really close-knit town with just under 1,000 people, so we were pretty far out from any big populated cities. The woods on the outskirts were very flat, no mountains or hills, but had a few ponds and some small rivers running through the middle. I was heading to one of these rivers. I'd been there before a few times, though I'd never had the chance to camp there until this day. As I could recall from the previous times, I knew it was about a 3-hour walk, almost perfectly north. As I walked between the trees, it was very quiet, aside from birds and other animals rustling the leaves around me. There were no people or hikers, and I didn't plan to see anyone, because this was not even a trail, it was just open woods. But as I was just 45 minutes out from the river, I ran into someone. We were both walking toward each other, and it seemed like neither of us had noticed the other until we were just a few feet away, separated by only a couple trees. I know I had a confused and almost nervous look, finding it really unusual to run into someone off trail in the middle of these woods, but the man had the same look. I was about to break the silence and say hello, but after a second, his face shifted into a slight nervous smile and he turned to walk off to the side. I followed his lead and kept on walking as well, but I looked back once I got a little further away and saw the man was no longer walking, but almost running away. Not saying a word when running into each other gave me a somewhat unsettled feeling, but seeing him run off like that only made it even stranger. It was like the man did not want to be seen, or he didn't care about the almost impossible chance that we had run into each other. Whatever the case, I kept minding my own business and made my way to the river. This was no campsite or anything, so I just plopped my bag and tent down on the flattest area I could find. Then I got a fire going, since the sun was just about to set. I tossed in a bunch of random sticks and twigs that were around and made sure it would burn for a couple hours at least. I was hoping to stay up and wait until the stars came out so I could do some stargazing. Away from town, I can often get a good view of the Milky Way, which is a sight I never want to miss out on. Hours passed while I was sitting and waiting, until a distinct sound came through the quiet woods behind me. Footsteps, slow and careful ones. I turned and looked, not seeing much in the dark. As I gazed around though, the footsteps stopped, telling me that while I may not see them, they can see me. I reached down for my bag and picked up a heavy-duty flashlight, shining it at the trees. I could see decently far now, but as I moved it back and forth, I didn't see anyone. I felt my heart rate increasing a bit as the unsettling feeling came over me again. Anyone out there? I tried again. Hello? Not even the sound of another footstep. After a moment of contemplation, I started to walk toward where I'd heard the sound from. I thought maybe there was a chance I was mistaken, but I needed to be sure. I carefully stepped through the woods, keeping the flashlight steadily pointing ahead, until I got to where I thought the sound was from. I moved the light to my left, looking behind each tree, until the light suddenly revealed a large man. It was the one I'd run into only a few hours ago. He was no more than 20 feet away, but even with the light on him, he stood still. In an act of quick thinking, I tried to not react and continued to move my flashlight across the woods, hoping he would think that I somehow didn't see him. Then I began walking back to the tent, trying to act as unbothered as possible. I picked up my bag and looked around once more, before quickly leaving my tent and campfire behind and walking into the woods along the riverside. Once I felt I'd made enough distance, I sprinted as far as I could until I was without a doubt away from that man. I found a spot to rest at and sat there awake until sunrise. I don't think I was followed, as I was able to make it out without ever hearing or seeing that man again. I'm not sure why he was out there, or why he had shown up and hid by my campsite. but I never went back to retrieve my tent in fear that I might find out. This was back in 2015 or 2016. I'm a career tow truck driver, and at this point I've been towing cars for most of my adult life. I will likely do so until I either retire or die, whichever comes first. At the time, I was working for a pretty small towing company with only 2 employees, and we rotated who was on call each weekend. It was my weekend on call, and it was summer, so with people being out and about late and whatnot, I was pretty busy. Cleaning up accidents, towing broken down cars, both in the city and off the highway. I was fine with it, as I was paid commission at the time, so the more calls I did, the more money I made. It was a Saturday night, now Sunday morning, and it's around 2:30 to 3 o'clock in the morning. And like I said, I've been busy. I'm tired and a little grumpy, and I kind of just wanted to go home. When my phone rings, it's an insurance company asking if we can do a tow for one of their customers who was broken down on the side of the highway. The breakdown location they give me is about 15 miles out of town, which I normally wouldn't do. But the tow destination happens to be a dealership that's only a couple minutes away from my apartment. I contemplated rejecting the call, but because I'm paid commission, I figured screw it. I can run up and grab this car, drop it off around the corner from my place, and hopefully I can just head home and get a couple hours of shut-eye. So I take the call and I hop on the highway. The insurance company provided me with the customer's first name, which we'll say was Kara, and gave me a phone number for her. Usually I try to make contact with people who are on the side of the highway to let them know I'm on my way and give them an ETA. I tried calling her a couple of times, but she didn't answer. Not unusual, though. After a short while, I see hazard lights up the way on the shoulder, so I turn on my strobes and start slowing down. As I approach, I notice that not only is there the late model car that I'm looking for, but there's another car on scene as well that doesn't have its hazards on, and is parked in front of the car I'm meant to tow. This can be kind of annoying but not uncommon, as I need to be able to get in front of the disabled car in order to load it, and sometimes people don't realize that. But because the car is there, I instead pull up behind both cars. You're supposed to do this so that as the tow driver, you're the one that has to make the weird maneuver of pulling off the shoulder and back onto the shoulder. And so the other car just has to drive straight forward on the shoulder. Standing at the trunk of the late model car, which is now directly in front of me, is a man and a woman. The woman is probably in her early 20s and dressed up for a night out. She's probably about 5'1", maybe 5'2", and she's wearing tight leather pants, a halter top, long black hair, and is very pretty. The man, on the other hand, is probably around 5'10" and skinny, maybe 150 pounds, wearing a dark hoodie and dirty jeans. They're standing very close, facing each other. She has her arms crossed and he's leaning down talking to her. I stepped out of my truck and approached them both and introduced myself. They separate a few feet and I look at the woman and say, "Are you Kara?" And she nods. I say I'm here for an insurance company, and I ask what's going on with the car. Pretty much immediately the man pipes up and says, "Yeah, it's just having some fuel issues. It's an easy fix. Can you please just drop it off at this commuter parking lot? I'm gonna fix it up for her." I'm rather annoyed at this because the commuter lot in question is further up the highway and I'm already 15 miles out of town. Like I said before, I only took this call because it was supposed to be coming back toward my apartment and I really wanted to go home. Not only that, but in order to change the original tow destination, I would have to call the insurance company and wait on hold for who knows how long for a representative, and then let them know of the change and try to get them to pay me extra for the dead miles back home after unloading. And I really didn't want to do any of that. And thirdly, this is a late model car. I'm no mechanic, but it's new enough that whatever is wrong with it is likely covered under warranty. So the dealership is really the best place for it to go anyways. I explained all this to the guy, but he's really not having it. He starts to get stern with me, saying something like, "Look man, you just need to take the car while I tell you to take it." We go back and forth on this for maybe 60 seconds and he's just getting more mad. "Well, you know what, man? You're not the name insured. Car is. The easy way to settle this is to ask what she wants me to do with the car, and whatever she says is what I'll do. Fingers crossed she'll want to take it to the dealership so I can get home sooner." So I turn to look at Car to ask her that question, and I don't see her right away. She's no longer standing where she was just a minute ago, which was slightly off to my right. I continue to not see her until I've turned almost all the way around, because she's standing directly behind me, And by directly, I mean within an inch of my back, arms still crossed. I look down at her and she locks eyes with me. Her eyes were as wide as plates, almost owl-like. And immediately it feels like she's staring into my soul. She didn't say a word and she didn't have to. I took a step back and did what felt like a double take. I looked at him, then at her, then at him again, and then back at her. And it slowly started to dawn on me that maybe something isn't right. I asked her, "Do you know this guy?" She ever so slightly shook her head no. The expression on her face when I asked her that will forever be burned in my skull. I turned to the guy and was like, "Oh, you gotta go, man." Now, I'm not gonna say I'm a tough guy, if there is such thing, and I don't care who knows it. I've got nothing to prove. I'm also super averse to confrontation, and I'll run at the first sign of trouble. I'm not exactly the biggest of guys either. I am, however, what I like to call sturdy. I'm 5'8" and 240 pounds. I have a bit of a gut, but I also have big thighs and broad shoulders. People are generally surprised to find out that I weigh as much as I do. And I think that might have been my saving grace for what happened next. Without a word, the guy starts to move for Kara, and I move to stay in between them. He tries to push me out of his way by shoving me in the chest, but because I believe he underestimated my weight, he only pushed me hard enough to make me take a single step back. Immediately, I took that step forward towards him and body checked him hard as I could. Hard enough to completely knock him over, basically onto his ass. Because we rotated during the back and forth push bit, Kara is now in front of me to my right, somewhat between me and the guy who's trying to scramble to his feet. I reached out and snatched the poor girl up by her waist and spun her towards my truck and yelled for her to get into the driver's side, and she does. I turn back to the guy who's standing up again at this point, and he's breathing hard. He gets right up in my face but doesn't do anything, just breathes at me. I stare him right in his face and mustering up the best dad voice I can, I just say, "You need to go." I'm shaking now and I'm absolutely terrified. Had no clue if he had a weapon, and I didn't know if he was going to try to fight me. And I don't know what I would do if he did. Like I said, I don't really consider myself a tough guy. I don't know how to fight, and I've never been in a fight in my life. What if I get badly hurt? What if I get stabbed? What the hell do I do now? I just want to go home. Wasn't even going to take the stam call. All this is running through my head at lightning speed. After probably around 15 seconds or so, which felt like eons, he kind of huffs a bit, smiles one of the creepiest smiles I've ever seen, and finally starts to back off, sucking his teeth and rubbing his hands together. He slowly walks backwards a few steps, then makes his way to his car and gets in, and drives off. I stay motionless, watching him until I could no longer see his taillights. I got Kara's car loaded up on the tow truck, and as we made our way to the dealership, she told me through tears that her car had shut off while she was driving. She pulled onto the shoulder and called her parents, because she was on their insurance. Her parents made the call to the insurance company, who eventually dispatched me to her location. While she was waiting, a bit after she made the call, the guy pulled up in front of her and walked up to her passenger side window to try to talk to her, asking if she needed help, etc. She told him she was fine, and a tow truck was coming and she didn't need any help. But he persisted as she tried to tell him off. Eventually, she tried to roll up the window. Apparently, he was able to stick his arm in the window and got the door unlocked and opened the door. So in fear, she jumps out of the car, leaving her phone inside, and ran to the back of her car and stayed put there, because it was in the line of sight of traffic. Apparently, he was pretty lewd with her. Whenever she tried to go back to the car, he would prevent her from getting in. Several months later, I showed up. Who knows what would have happened had the timing been any different. Her parents were waiting at the dealership when we arrived, and she told them what had just happened. Her parents also gave me a $20 tip, which was all the cash they had on them at the time. And Kara gave me a very tight and clearly heartfelt hug before I left. I never saw her again. I tell you what, every guy has probably daydreamed at some point of coming to the rescue of a beautiful girl in trouble. Myself included. You think you can act like a superhero, that you're gonna be the cat's ass. But for me, being in that situation, in that moment, is one of the most terrible feelings I've ever had in my life. Being forced into a confrontation I didn't want, nor was prepared for. Not knowing what to expect from a clearly not well unhinged individual. I didn't feel like the cat's ass, I didn't feel like a hero. I felt like a scared little kid encountering a bully on the playground for the first time. If I'm ever in a situation like that, I will never not intervene though. I just really hope I don't have to.